Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've never been the type to believe in monsters or cryptids or whatever you want to call them. Growing up in New England, I'd heard all the stories, Wendigos, skinwalkers, and of course Bigfoot. Always thought they were just campfire tales to scare kids and tourists. But what happened to me last year changed everything I thought I knew about the world. I moved to a small cabin west of Holton, Maine, back in early September of 2020. With everything going on in the world, I wanted to get away from people for a while. The cabin was nothing fancy. Just a one-bedroom place with a decent kitchen, a small living room, and a porch that wrapped halfway around. The real selling point was the location. Surrounded by dense forest with no neighbors for about a mile in any direction. Perfect for someone like me who needed space. My dog Riker came with me, of course. He's a black lab, about 7 years old, and honestly, the best companion I could ask for. He's always been fearless, chases bears away from campgrounds, stands his ground against aggressive dogs twice his size. Nothing rattles him. That's why what happened was so unsettling. It started on a Tuesday night around 11:30. I remember because I'd been binge-watching some stupid show on Netflix and realized how late it had gotten. I got up to let Riker out for his last bathroom break before bed. Like we'd done every night since moving in. Usually he'd be at the door before I even stood up, tail wagging and ready to go sniff around the property. But that night, he stayed curled up on his bed in the corner. I called him and he just looked at me, didn't move. "Come on, buddy, last chance before bed," I said, holding the door open. Riker got up slowly, which wasn't like him at all. He approached the door cautiously, his body low to the ground. When he got to the threshold, he stopped dead, his hackles raised, and he started growling, a deep rumbling sound I'd rarely heard him make. I stepped onto the porch, thinking maybe there was a raccoon or something in the yard. "It's okay, Riker, come on." He wouldn't budge, just stood there, growling at the darkness beyond the porch light. I was about to force him out when something slammed against the side of the cabin with so much force, the whole structure vibrated. It was like someone had taken a battering ram to the wall. Riker yelped and scrambled backward, knocking into my legs. I stumbled and fell back into the cabin, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. I kicked the door shut with my foot and locked it, hands shaking. Whatever hit the cabin wasn't small. The impact had rattled the windows and knocked a picture off the wall. I sat there on the floor, Riker pressed against me, both of us staring at the door. I kept thinking it must have been a bear. Maine has black bears, and maybe one was checking out the trash cans I kept on that side of the cabin. After about 20 minutes of sitting frozen in place, I worked up the courage to peek out the window. I couldn't see anything in the darkness. The porch light only illuminated about 15 feet out, and beyond that was pitch black. No glowing eyes, no movement. I didn't sleep much that night. Riker refused to leave my side, even to go to his own bed. He kept his head up, ears perked, listening. Every so often, he'd growl softly at nothing I could see or hear. The next morning, I checked outside. There were no trash cans knocked over, no scratches on the siding where the impact had happened. Nothing seemed disturbed at all, which was weird. A bear would have left some evidence. That day passed normally. I worked from my laptop, took Riker for a walk, he seemed fine during daylight, and tried to convince myself that the noise had been a falling branch or something, but deep down I knew better. The force of that impact wasn't natural. That night I decided I needed to figure out what was going on. Around 10, I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight, put Riker in the bedroom, he wouldn't have gone out with me anyway, and stepped onto the porch. The night was cool and completely silent. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. That should have been my first warning. I walked around the cabin, shining my light into the woods surrounding the clearing. Nothing seemed out of place until I reached the spot where I'd heard the impact the night before. The siding looked fine, but there was a small pile of bark and debris on the ground. Looking up, I realized a branch from a nearby pine tree was broken, hanging at an odd angle about 20 feet up. Had something thrown a branch at my cabin? That didn't make sense. I continued checking the perimeter, moving farther from the cabin than I probably should have. When I reached the edge of the clearing on the east side, my flashlight beam caught something reflective about 30 feet away, just inside the tree line. Eyes. Two large, amber-colored eyes positioned higher off the ground than should be possible. My first thought was mountain lion in a tree, but that didn't make sense. The eyes were too far apart, and mountain lions aren't native to Maine anyway. I raised my flashlight higher, and that's when I saw it. Standing there, half hidden by a massive pine, was something impossible. It was tall, way taller than me, and I'm 6 feet. Maybe 7 or 8 feet at least. Its body was massive, with broad shoulders and a wide chest that tapered to a narrower waist, and it was covered in dark, matted hair. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, as my brain tried to process what I was seeing. It looked vaguely human in its proportions, but there was nothing human about its size or the way it held itself. Its arms hung longer than they should, with huge hands that could easily wrap around my entire head. For several heartbeats, we just stared at each other. Then it moved slightly, shifting its weight, and I realized it had been standing perfectly still this whole time, watching me. Maybe it had been watching me for days. My flashlight beam was still on its face, a face I can barely describe even now. Flat nose, deep-set eyes under a heavy brow ridge, and a mouth that seemed too wide for its face. Not a mask, not a costume. This thing was alive and breathing and watching me with obvious intelligence. Then it screamed. I'll never forget that sound as long as I live. It started as a low rumble, almost like a growl, then rose into this throat-tearing roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. Not a bear, not a mountain lion, not even close. It was primal and territorial and unmistakably meant as a warning. I dropped my flashlight. I don't even remember doing it. 1 second it was in my hand, the next I was running blind across the clearing toward my cabin, certain that this thing was right behind me. I could feel its presence, like a physical weight pressing on my back. I hit my porch steps, stumbled, fell hard on my knees, but scrambled up and threw myself against the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. The whole time, I was waiting for massive hands to grab me from behind. I finally got inside, slammed the door, and locked it. Riker was going crazy, barking and spinning in circles. I ran through the cabin, locking every window, pulling down every blind. Then I grabbed my shotgun from the closet and sat with my back against the bedroom wall, Riker pressed against me, both of us listening. Nothing came. No footsteps on the porch, no more screams from the forest, just complete oppressive silence. But I knew it was out there, watching, waiting. I didn't sleep at all that night. Kept the shotgun across my lap until the first light of dawn started filtering through the blinds. Only then did I feel safe enough to check the windows. When I finally worked up the courage to go outside, it was full daylight. The first thing I noticed was my flashlight lying in the grass where I'd dropped it, but what made my blood run cold were the tracks. They started at the tree line exactly where the creature had been standing and led straight to my porch. Deep impressions in the soft ground, wider than my 2 hands placed side by side. The stride length was massive, easily twice what mine would be. These weren't bear tracks. Bears don't walk on 2 legs for that distance. But what really convinced me this wasn't some elaborate prank or hallucination was the handprint. There, on the window frame of my bedroom, the only window I'd left cracked open for air, was a massive, distinct handprint in the dust and pollen. Fingers as long and thick as my wrist, a palm as wide as a dinner plate. It had been right outside my bedroom while I cowered inside. I took photos of everything with shaking hands, though I've never shown them to anyone. Who would believe me? What would they say? That I encountered a Sasquatch, that Bigfoot is real and decided to terrorize me in my rental cabin. I packed my things that day, threw everything in my truck and left before nightfall. Called the rental agency from the road and told them there was a family emergency, lost my security deposit, but I didn't care. Nothing could have made me spend another night in that cabin. It's been over a year now, and I've moved to a suburb outside Portland, somewhere with neighbors and streetlights, and no forests pressing in from all sides. Riker seems to have recovered fine, but sometimes he still wakes up in the middle of the night, growling at nothing. I don't talk about what happened, haven't told my family or friends. They'd think I was crazy or lying or both. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that deep in the woods of Maine, there's something powerful and territorial that doesn't want humans encroaching on its space. Sometimes I wonder if it was just passing through, or if it lives there permanently. I wonder if the next tenant of that cabin has experienced anything similar. Part of me wants to warn them, but what would I say? Watch out for the 8-foot-tall, hair-covered creature that might throw branches at your house. All I know is that I'm never going back to those woods, never going anywhere remote again. Some places we're just not welcome, and some things are better left alone. Story 2. I still remember the summer of 1972, like it was yesterday. I was 7 years old and buzzing with excitement because I got to go fishing with my grandpa and my cousin Robbie. For a little kid, there was nothing better than spending time with Grandpa. He knew all the best fishing spots around Lake Tyler East, and he always let us eat candy in his old pickup truck, something my mum would never allow. That day started so normal. Grandpa picked us up early in the morning. His tackle box rattled in the back of the truck as we drove down those country roads toward the lake. The whole day was exactly what a kid would want. Fishing, eating sandwiches Grandma had packed, and listening to Grandpa's stories about catching the big one back in his day. I remember getting tired as the afternoon wore on. The sun beat down on us, and Robbie and I had jumped in the lake to cool off a few times. By the time evening rolled around, we had caught enough fish for Grandpa to be satisfied, and we packed up to head home. The sky was turning that orangey-purple color it gets right before dark. As we drove down County Road 230, I was sitting in the middle of the bench seat between Grandpa and Robbie, my legs sticking to the vinyl from the heat. Robbie had nodded off, his head bumping against the window with every little dip in the road. I wasn't sleepy at all. I was staring out the windshield, watching the trees go by and counting fence posts to pass the time. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a cow or maybe a horse that had gotten loose from somebody's farm. It was walking along the tree line about 100 yards from the road. But something didn't look right. "Grandpa," I said, tugging on his sleeve. "What's that?" He slowed the truck down a little, squinting through the windshield. "What's what, Jimmy?" "That," I pointed. "By the trees." When Grandpa saw what I was pointing at, his foot eased off the gas pedal and the truck slowed even more. That's when I knew whatever I was seeing wasn't normal. It wasn't a cow, it wasn't a horse, it wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. The thing was huge, way bigger than any man I'd ever seen. It was walking on 2 legs, but not like a person walks. Its legs were bent like it was halfway to squatting down, and it swayed from side to side with each step. Its arms were long, too long, and they swung way out to the sides when it moved, almost like it was trying to keep its balance. As our truck got closer, I could see more details, and my stomach started to feel like I'd swallowed a rock. The thing was covered in hair, not fur like an animal, but hair, thick and matted and a weird grayish-white color that stood out against the darkening trees behind it. "What is that, Grandpa?" I whispered. My voice must have woken Robbie because he sat up and rubbed his eyes. "What are you guys looking at?" he asked. leaning forward to see past me. The moment Robbie spoke, the thing stopped walking. That's when it turned to look at us. And I'll never forget how it moved. It didn't just turn its head. Its whole upper body twisted around, like its neck couldn't move on its own, like something was wrong with it. Even from that distance, I could see its face wasn't covered in hair like the rest of it. The face was dark brown and leathery looking, with deep-set eyes that I couldn't really make out from that far away, but I could feel them staring right at our truck, right at me. Grandpa had slowed the truck to almost a complete stop by then. None of us said anything for what felt like forever, but was probably just a few seconds. Then it moved again. When it realized we had spotted it, the thing started walking faster, not running exactly, but moving with purpose. It reached a fence, one of those barbed wire ones that separated the pasture from the woods, and it just stepped over it, not climbed, not jumped. Stepped over it like it was nothing more than a stick on the ground. Then it disappeared into the trees. The whole thing couldn't have lasted more than 20 or 30 seconds, but it felt like time had slowed down while we watched it. As soon as it was gone, Grandpa hit the gas hard, making the tires spit gravel. He pulled a U-turn right there in the middle of the road and started driving back the way we'd come. "Grandpa, what was that?" Robbie asked, his voice shaky. I was glad he asked because I couldn't get any words out. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Grandpa's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. His face looked different than I'd ever seen it, scared but also angry somehow. "Listen to me, both of you," he said, not taking his eyes off the road. "We didn't see anything. You understand me? Nothing." "But Grandpa," I started. "No, Jimmy." His voice was firm, but I could hear it shaking a little. "People will think you're crazy. They'll call you liars and they'll never believe you. So we keep this between us, just us three." We drove in silence for a while. I kept looking out the back window, half expecting to see the thing following us. "How tall do you think it was, Grandpa?" I finally whispered. He sighed. 8 feet maybe, big, 400 pounds at least. "Was it a bear?" Robbie asked, though I think we all knew it wasn't. Grandpa didn't answer that question. He just kept driving, taking a completely different route home. When we got back to Grandpa's house, he told Grandma we'd decided to cut the fishing trip short because we were tired. He never mentioned what we saw. Not to her, not to my parents when they came to pick me up. Not to anyone. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing turning to look at us, its whole body twisting unnaturally. I kept thinking about how easily it had stepped over that fence, how quickly it had disappeared into the woods. What if it followed us home? What if it was outside my window right now? The next morning I tried to talk to my mom about it, but I remembered what Grandpa had said about people thinking we were crazy. So instead, I asked her if there were any animals that walked on 2 legs in the woods around Lake Tyler. "Like what, honey, a bear?" she asked, not really paying attention as she folded laundry. "No," I said, like a really tall person, but not a person." She looked at me then, her eyebrows scrunched together. "Have you been watching those monster movies again? I told your dad not to let you watch those." I never brought it up again after that. A few days later, when I went back to Grandpa's house, I tried to talk to Robbie about what we'd seen. He was 2 years older than me and usually liked to act tough, but as soon as I mentioned that thing by the lake, his face went pale. "Shut up, Jimmy," he hissed, looking around to make sure no one could hear us. "Grandpa said not to talk about it." "But don't you want to know what it was?" I asked. "No," he said firmly, "and neither should you." Later that summer, I overheard Grandpa and one of his friends talking on the porch. The friend was saying something about a farmer who'd lost some livestock over near the lake. Said the animals had been torn up bad, and the farmer couldn't figure out what kind of predator could have done it. Grandpa got real quiet, then changed the subject. I started having nightmares after that. Dreams, where I was alone in the woods and could hear heavy footsteps following me, getting closer and closer. I'd wake up sweating, convinced the thing was in my room, watching me from the corner. My mum thought I was just going through a phase, afraid of the dark like most kids my age. But it wasn't the dark I was afraid of. It was what I'd seen in the daylight. As I got older, I tried to convince myself that maybe we'd just seen a bear or some other animal that looked strange in the evening light. But deep down, I knew better. Bears don't walk on two legs for that long. They don't have hairless, leathery faces. And they don't stand 8 feet tall. Sometimes I'd try to bring it up with Robbie when no one else was around. Remember that day at the lake? I'd start, and he'd immediately shut me down. "Drop it, Jimmy," he'd say. Even now, almost 50 years later, Robbie refuses to talk about what we saw. We're both grown men with families of our own. But whenever I've tried to bring it up, he either changes the subject or finds an excuse to leave the room. Grandpa took the secret to his grave. He passed away when I was 15, and not once in the years between did he ever mention what we saw that evening. But sometimes, when we'd drive near Lake Tyler East, I'd catch him scanning the tree line. His eyes narrowed, like he was looking for something. I've read books and articles about Bigfoot sightings over the years. Some of the descriptions match what we saw that day. The height, the walking style. But others don't. The thing we saw wasn't covered in the dark brown or black hair that most Bigfoot witnesses describe, and its face, that hairless, leathery face, isn't something I've read about in other accounts. A few years ago, I drove out to CR 230 by myself. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Some evidence maybe, or just some peace of mind. The area has built up a lot since 1972. There are more houses, fewer stretches of uninterrupted woods. The fence where the thing stepped over is long gone, replaced by someone's manicured lawn. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the spot where I thought we'd seen it. Had it really been there, or had we somehow all shared the same hallucination? Then I noticed something at the edge of the tree line. About where the thing had disappeared that day, there was a break in the undergrowth, a sort of path leading into the deeper woods. It could have been made by deer or other wildlife, of course. That would be the logical explanation. But I couldn't make myself get out of the car to investigate. Something primal inside me said to stay away, to leave now. I listened to that instinct and drove home. I've never told my wife or kids about what I saw. Like Grandpa said, people would think I'm crazy. They'd call me a liar, and honestly, sometimes I almost wish I was lying. It would be easier than carrying this certainty that there's something out there in the woods that science can't explain, something that shouldn't exist, but does. I'm 57 years old now, and I still can't drive past a thick stretch of woods without scanning the tree line. I still can't go camping without feeling like I'm being watched, and I still wake up sometimes heart racing from dreams of that grayish-white figure with the unnatural walk and the twist of its upper body as it turned to look at us. I don't know what we saw that day. I don't know if it was something known to science that just looked strange in the evening light, or if it was something else entirely. But I know what I saw, and so did Grandpa, and so did Robbie, even if he'll never admit it now. Whatever it was, it saw us too. And sometimes, when I'm alone near the woods, I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, still watching, still remembering the truck with the old man and 2 boys who spotted it on a summer evening in 1972. Story 3. I've never been a believer in the supernatural or cryptids or any of that stuff. I'm just a regular guy trying to make it through life one day at a time. But what happened to my family and me last summer in Lincoln County changed everything. I thought I knew about the world. I moved back to my childhood home about 2 years ago when my mom's Alzheimer's got bad enough that she couldn't live alone anymore. It's a modest 3-bedroom house on about 5 acres, mostly wooded, about 20 minutes outside of Stanford. My wife passed away 4 years ago, so it's just me and my twin boys, Zachary and Jordan. They're 10, full of energy, and they were actually excited about moving to the country where they could explore the woods and catch frogs in the creek like I did when I was their age. The first few months were challenging, but uneventful. Mom has good days and bad days. Sometimes she knows who I am. Sometimes she thinks I'm my dad. And sometimes I'm just a stranger in her house. The boys are good with her, though. They don't take it personally when she forgets their names or asks them the same questions over and over. It was an ordinary Tuesday in June when it happened. The boys were at summer day camp, and Mom was having a decent day. I was washing dishes at the kitchen sink around 2 in the afternoon when I had that feeling, you know the one, like someone was watching me. I looked up, expecting to see a deer or maybe a neighbor's dog in the backyard. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. There was a face staring at me through the window. Not a human face, not an animal face either. At least not any animal I recognized. It was huge, filling the entire window frame, with deep-set eyes that seemed to stare right through me. The face was covered in dark hair or fur, with a somewhat flattened nose and a heavy brow. But the eyes, God, those eyes were intelligent, aware, studying me. We locked eyes for maybe 3 seconds before it disappeared. I dropped a plate, shattering it in the sink, and ran to the back door. By the time I got outside, I caught just a glimpse of something massive moving at the edge of the tree line about 50 yards away. It was enormous, at least 7 feet tall, covered in dark brown or black hair, and moving with a speed that didn't seem possible for something so large. It wasn't running like a person runs. It was covering ground in these huge, fluid strides that carried it into the woods in seconds. I stood there shaking, trying to process what I'd just seen. My rational brain immediately started making excuses. It was a bear, even though we don't have bears around here. It was a guy in a costume. Why would someone do that? I was overtired and seeing things, but deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real, and it wasn't anything normal. I didn't tell the boys when they got home. I didn't want to scare them, and honestly, I was hoping it was just a weird one-time thing that I could forget about. Mom didn't notice anything unusual, but that's not surprising given her condition. 3 days passed without incident. I started to relax, convincing myself I'd somehow misinterpreted what I'd seen. Then Jordan came running into my room at around 1 in the morning, pale and trembling. "Dad, there's someone looking in my window," he whispered, his voice shaking. My heart sank. Our bedrooms are on the 2nd floor. I grabbed the baseball bat I keep beside my bed and hurried to the boys' room. Zachary was still fast asleep, but Jordan was terrified. I looked out his window but saw nothing except the dark yard and the woods beyond. "What did it look like?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Like a monkey, but huge," he said. "It had a face like a monkey, but bigger, and it was just staring at me." I checked all the doors and windows, made sure everything was locked, and then let Jordan sleep in my room. I told him it was probably just a dream, but I don't think either of us believed that. The next morning, I walked around the outside of the house looking for footprints or any sign that something had been there. Under Jordan's window, the flower bed was disturbed, with several plants crushed, and there, pressed into the soft soil, was what looked like a footprint, except it was huge, easily 15 inches long, with 5 distinct toes. It was nothing like a bear print, nothing like any animal print I've ever seen. I didn't know what to do. Who do you call when there's a, whatever it was, watching your family? I couldn't go to the police. They'd think I was crazy. So I bought a few security cameras online and installed them around the property, pointing at each approach to the house. I also started keeping a loaded shotgun in my bedroom closet, something I never thought I'd do with kids in the house. For about a week, nothing happened. The cameras didn't catch anything unusual, and I was starting to think maybe Jordan really had just had a nightmare that fed off my own experience. Then my mom started talking about the black man who watches her at night. Now, I need to be clear, this wasn't racial. My mom isn't like that. She kept describing a large, tall, solid, black-looking man with the deepest black eyes who stands outside her window and watches her. She said sometimes he would put his hand against the glass, and his fingers were too long and wrong-looking. Her room is on the first floor, and she has episodes of sundowner's syndrome where she gets confused and agitated in the evenings. I initially dismissed it as part of her condition, but after what Jordan and I had seen, I wasn't so sure anymore. Then came the deer incident. It was around dusk, and we were all in the living room. The boys were playing a board game with Mom, who was having one of her good evenings. I was reading in the armchair when we heard this frantic crashing sound from the woods. Before I could even get up to look, a full-grown doe burst from the tree line, running faster than I've ever seen a deer move. It wasn't the casual bounding that deer normally do. This animal was in absolute terror, running for its life. It ran straight toward our house, seeming not even to see it, and slammed into our front picture window with such force that the whole house shook. The window didn't break, thank God, but the deer hit it hard enough that it slid down the glass, leaving a smear of blood before it staggered away into the darkness. Whatever was chasing it remained in the woods, unseen. The boys were upset, naturally. Mum didn't seem to register what had happened. I told the boys that deer sometimes get confused and run into things, but the look of absolute terror in that animal's eyes told a different story. It was running from something it feared more than death. That night, after everyone was in bed, I sat up in the living room with the shotgun across my lap, watching the woods through the window. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it, voices, or rather, a voice. It was coming from somewhere in the dark yard, a low, rumbling sound that almost resembled speech, but wasn't quite language. The cadence was all wrong, rising and falling in patterns that didn't match any human speech I've ever heard. I stood up slowly, keeping away from the windows, and listened harder. The sound continued for maybe 30 seconds, this deep rhythmic vocalization that made the hair on my arms stand up. Then it stopped, and the normal night sounds returned. Crickets, an occasional owl, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I called my sister in Lexington and asked if she could take Mum for a few days, making up some excuse about needing to do repairs on the house. I considered taking the boys and leaving too. But where would we go? This was our home. I wasn't going to be driven out by whatever this was. After my sister picked up Mom, I sat the boys down and tried to have an age-appropriate conversation about what had been happening. I didn't want to terrify them, but I needed them to be cautious. Have either of you seen or heard anything strange around the house lately? I asked. Zachary, who hadn't mentioned seeing anything unusual before, looked at Jordan and then back at me. The woodsman, he said quietly. The what? That's what we call him, Jordan added. The woodsman. We've both seen him watching the house. I felt sick. Why didn't you tell me? We thought you'd think we were making it up, Zachary said, and we didn't want to scare Mom. I asked them to describe what they'd seen. Their descriptions matched. A very tall, hair-covered figure that sometimes walked on 2 legs like a person and sometimes moved on all 4s like an animal. They said it would stand at the edge of the woods for long periods, just watching our house. They'd seen it 3 or 4 times in the past couple of weeks, always at dusk or early evening. I made them promise to stay close to the house and to come get me immediately if they saw it again. Then I went online and started researching. What I found both terrified and relieved me. Terrified because it confirmed there was something out there. Relieved because at least I wasn't going crazy. The descriptions of Bigfoot or Sasquatch matched what we'd seen. The height, the hair-covered body, the face that seemed both ape-like and human-like. I'd always dismissed these stories as nonsense, but now I wasn't so sure. 2 days later, I had my most terrifying encounter yet. I needed to get some firewood from our storage shed, about 70 yards into the woods. It was early evening, still light out. and I told the boys to stay inside while I made a quick trip. I was nearly to the shed when I felt it, that same sensation of being watched that I'd felt in the kitchen. I stopped and scanned the woods around me. Nothing moved, but I knew it was there. I could feel its presence, like electricity in the air. I hurried to the shed, grabbed an armful of wood, and started back toward the house. That's when I heard footsteps paralleling mine in the woods to my right, heavy footsteps that couldn't belong to anything as small as a person. They were keeping pace with me, moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped. Whatever it was just out of sight, maybe 30 feet away in the denser trees. I didn't run. Something told me running would be the worst thing I could do. Instead, I kept a steady pace, clutching the firewood so hard my knuckles turned white. The footsteps continued alongside me the whole way back to the yard. When I reached the edge of the woods, they stopped. I looked back but saw nothing except the deepening shadows between the trees. But I knew it was there, watching me return to the house. That night, we heard something moving around the house. Heavy footsteps on the porch, strange scraping sounds against the siding. At one point, something rattled the back door handle so forcefully I thought it would break through. The boys were terrified, huddled with me in my bedroom as we listened to the sounds of something large circling our house. By morning, it was gone. The cameras had all stopped working sometime during the night, all batteries drained, even though they'd been fully charged. The only evidence anything had been there was a series of those same massive footprints in the soft dirt around the house, and deep scratches in the wooden siding by the back door. That was 3 months ago. The strange thing is, after that night of circling our house, all activity stopped completely. No more sightings, no more sounds, no more footprints. It was as if whatever had been watching us simply lost interest or moved on. Mom came back home, and her talk of the black man at her window has stopped too. The boys still don't like to play in the woods alone, and honestly, neither do I. Sometimes at night, I still think I hear that strange, rumbling, almost speech in the distance, but it could just be my imagination now. I don't know what was watching us last summer. I don't know why it was so interested in my family or why it suddenly left us alone. All I know is that the woods behind my house don't feel empty anymore. When I look out at the trees from my kitchen window, I can't shake the feeling that something out there is looking back. Something that doesn't belong in our world but exists in it nonetheless. I've never told anyone this story until now. Part of me still wants to believe there's a rational explanation for everything that happened, but deep down, I know what we saw was real, and I know it's still out there somewhere in the woods of Lincoln County, Kentucky. Story 4. I've never really told this story to many people because, honestly, who would believe me? But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. Back in December 2009, my wife Jennifer and I were living in what we thought was the middle of nowhere, about 25 miles northeast of Nome, Alaska. We'd been there for a little over 2 years at that point. It was just us and our dog, June, a husky mix who was the best companion we could ask for in that kind of isolation. Our closest neighbor was at least 15 miles away, which was exactly what we wanted when we decided to move off-grid. Our cabin wasn't anything fancy, just a small wooden structure with a loft where we slept. We heated the place with a wood stove, cooked on propane, and traveled around on our snowmobile when we needed to. No electricity except what we generated ourselves, no running water beyond what we collected. Simple living, you know, and we loved it. The silence, the stars at night, the northern lights. It was paradise for us. By mid-December that year, we had several feet of snow on the ground. It wasn't unusual. Alaska winters are no joke. That particular evening, December 17th, I'll never forget the date, we were finishing up dinner around 6 p.m. It gets dark early up there in winter, like by 3 in the afternoon, so we'd been inside for hours already. Jennifer had made venison stew, and we were just sitting at our little table, talking about nothing important. That's when we heard it. The first scream. I say scream, but that doesn't really capture it. It was so powerful that I swear the walls of our cabin vibrated. It came from the woods directly north of our property, where there's a ridge that overlooks our clearing. Jennifer froze with her spoon halfway to her mouth. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. I'd been in Alaska long enough to know the sounds of most animals. This wasn't a moose in distress. It wasn't wolves. This sound had raw power behind it, but it didn't sound panicked like an animal being attacked. It was deliberate. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe a bear." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't make sounds like that, especially not in December when they should be hibernating. We sat in stunned silence for about 10 minutes before it happened again. This time, the scream came from slightly further east along the ridge. Then 15 minutes later, another scream from even further east. It was moving. After about 4 screams, I couldn't just sit there anymore. "I'm going to check it out," I told Jennifer, grabbing my heavy coat and boots. "Are you insane?" she asked, but she was already putting her own coat on. That's one of the reasons I loved her. She was as curious and adventurous as I was. We stepped out onto our porch, bundled against the cold. It must have been minus 20 or 25 degrees that night. The moon was nearly full, casting an eerie glow on the snow-covered landscape around our cabin. June followed us to the door but wouldn't come out any further. She stood in the doorway whining, which was unusual for her. She loved the snow. We stood there listening as another scream tore through the night. It echoed through the trees like thunder. I've never heard anything like it before or since. It wasn't just loud. It was primal, ancient. I felt it in my chest more than I heard it with my ears. "Michael," Jennifer whispered, gripping my arm so tightly it hurt. "What makes a sound like that?" I shook my head. I had no answer. For a full hour, the screaming continued at regular intervals, 10 to 15 minutes apart, always moving slightly, circling along the ridge behind our property. Then the sounds changed. Instead of screams, we heard movement. Something heavy was moving through the snow, the distinctive crunch of snow under weight. But it wasn't just walking. It was circling our cabin, staying at a distance of maybe 100 yards or so. We could track its progress by the sound. Crunch, 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 pause, crunch, crunch, crunch. Whatever it was big and it was methodical. "Let's go inside," I said, suddenly aware of how exposed we were on the porch. Jennifer nodded and we hurried back in, locking the door behind us, something we rarely did out there. Inside, we turned off all our lights and went to the window facing north. I had a powerful flashlight, one of those high-beam LED ones that can light up objects hundreds of yards away. I opened the window a crack, despite the cold, so I could hear better and have an unobstructed view with the flashlight. The crunching was getting closer. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I swept the beam of light across the tree line. At first I saw nothing. Then, at the very edge of the beam's reach, I caught movement. I focused the light there and saw something, a figure. Tall, wide, dark. It was just beyond where my light could fully illuminate it, but I could make out its silhouette against the snow. Broad shoulders, long arms, a thick body that appeared to be covered in dark hair or fur. I couldn't see its face, but I had the distinct impression it was looking right at us. For a brief moment, it shifted slightly, as if adjusting its stance. Then it turned and disappeared into the darkness. The whole sighting couldn't have lasted more than 5 or 6 seconds, but those seconds are burned into my memory forever. "Did you see that?" Jennifer whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, unable to speak. June was under the table now, still whining softly. For the next several hours, we sat in our cabin with the lights off, listening. Around midnight, the screams started again, but they were farther away now. They continued intermittently until about 3 in the morning before stopping completely. Neither of us slept that night. We sat at the kitchen table, our rifle loaded and ready, jumping at every creak of the cabin, settling in the cold. When dawn finally came around 9:30 in the morning, we were exhausted but determined to see what had been out there. After a quick breakfast and making sure June had food and water, we bundled up and ventured outside. The day was clear and brutally cold, our breath freezing in the air before us. We walked around the cabin, looking for signs of whatever had been circling us. About 50 yards behind our cabin, heading toward the ridge, we found them. Tracks. But not like any animal tracks I'd ever seen. Each footprint was enormous. I measured them with my tape measure, about 20 inches long and 8 inches wide. They were deeply pressed into the snow, much deeper than my own boots made, suggesting whatever made them was incredibly heavy. But the most disturbing thing was the stride length. The distance between each footprint was huge, much longer than what a human could manage, especially in deep snow. The trail led up the ridge and into the thick trees beyond. Following the path with my eyes, I noticed branches broken or bent about 7 feet above the ground. Jennifer and I followed the tracks for about a quarter mile before wordlessly agreeing to turn back. Something about following those tracks felt dangerous, like we were tempting fate. "Bigfoot," Jennifer said quietly as we walked back to the cabin. It had to be. I'd always scoffed at Bigfoot stories. They seemed like tall tales, the kind of thing that made for good TV shows but had no basis in reality. But standing there, looking at those massive tracks in the snow, I couldn't think of any other explanation. We stayed at that cabin for another 6 months before circumstances led us back to more civilized areas. During that time, we never heard the screams again. Whatever had visited us that night never returned, at least not that we noticed, but I found myself scanning the tree line more often, especially at dusk, and I never went into the woods north of our cabin without my rifle again. It's been more than a decade now, but I still have nightmares about that night. I still hear those screams in my dreams and see that dark silhouette at the edge of the flashlight beam. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was some unusual atmospheric phenomenon creating strange sounds. Maybe what I saw was just a moose or bear standing oddly in the poor light. But deep down, I know what we experienced was real. That thing, whatever it was intelligent. It circled our cabin deliberately. It showed itself to us deliberately. It was letting us know that this was its territory, that we were the visitors there. And in all my years in the wilderness, I've never felt so small, so vulnerable as I did that night. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, moving through the remote forests of Alaska, screaming into the night. I wonder if other people have heard it, seen it, or if for some reason it chose to reveal itself to us specifically. I don't have any answers. All I know is that even in the most remote parts of Alaska, in places where humans rarely venture, we aren't alone. There are things in this world that defy explanation, things that remind us that for all our technology and progress, nature still holds mysteries we may never fully understand. And sometimes those mysteries scream in the night. Story 5. I never told many people about what happened to me back in '83. It's been 40 years now, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I was 17 then, living with my parents in Kent County, Michigan, about 20 minutes outside Grand Rapids. That summer night in July, I'd been over at my buddy Dave's house. We spent the evening playing Atari and listening to Def Leppard until his mom started giving us the eye around 11:30. I should have called my parents for a ride, but I didn't want to wake them up. Besides, I'd walked that route plenty of times before. Dave lived about 3 miles from my house along a gravel road that ran parallel to M22. There were stretches where the trees from the woods came right up to the road on both sides. No streetlights out there, just darkness. Usually, it didn't bother me. I remember everything about that night so clearly. The air was thick and humid after a late afternoon rain. The gravel crunched under my sneakers, and there was this misty fog hanging about 2 feet off the ground. The moon was bright enough that I could see my way without a flashlight, which was good because I'd forgotten mine. I'd walked maybe half a mile when I first got that feeling. You know that prickly sensation on the back of your neck when you feel like someone's watching you? It was like that, but stronger. I kept looking back, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness behind me. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not right behind me, but off to the side in the woods, keeping pace with me. At first, I thought it might be a deer. We had tons of them in the area, but these steps were too heavy, too deliberate. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped too. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just listening to the crickets and my own breathing. Nothing else. I started walking again, and within a few seconds the footsteps resumed. My heart was starting to beat faster. I told myself I was being stupid, that it was probably just an echo or my imagination. But then I decided to test it. I'd take a few steps, stop suddenly, and listen. So I did. I walked about 10 steps, then froze. The footsteps continued for one more step after I stopped, then silence. I waited, then started walking again. Same thing happened. I was really starting to freak out now. I picked up my pace a little, and whatever was in the woods kept up with me. The footsteps got faster too. Then I tried one more test. I took a single step and stopped abruptly. There was another footstep after mine. Then, after a pause, another one. Whatever was out there was moving closer. I couldn't help myself. I slowly turned and looked over my left shoulder toward the tree line. That's when I saw it. About 20 yards away, partially obscured by some trees, was this massive shape. It was at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller, and covered in dark hair. In the moonlight, I could make out broad shoulders and a large head that seemed to sit directly on those shoulders, with no visible neck. I stood there frozen, staring at it. It wasn't moving, just standing there among the trees. For a second, I tried to tell myself it was just a shadow or a tree stump. My mind was turning into something else, but then it moved. It took a step toward the road, toward me, and I lost it. Pure fear took over. I turned and ran faster than I've ever run in my life. I don't remember deciding to run. 1 second I was standing there, and the next I was sprinting down that gravel road, my feet barely touching the ground. I could hear heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush behind me, moving parallel to the road. Whatever it was running too. About half a mile down the road was the Johnsons' place. They had these big hound dogs that would bark at anything. As I got closer to their house, I could hear those dogs going absolutely insane. They weren't just barking. They were howling and yelping like they were terrified. That scared me even more, because those dogs weren't afraid of anything. I didn't stop at the Johnsons, I just kept running. The thing in the woods kept pace with me for a while, but as I got closer to more houses, the footsteps faded away. Still, I didn't slow down until I reached the part of the road where there were streetlights and houses close together. I was about a mile from home when a police cruiser pulled up beside me. The officer rolled down his window and asked what I was doing out so late. I must have looked a mess, sweating, out of breath, eyes wild with fear. "You okay, son?" he asked. "You running from something?" I didn't know what to say. Would he believe me if I told him about the thing in the woods? Probably not. So I just said I was heading home from a friend's house. Then he asked something that made my blood run cold. "You haven't seen a young girl out here, have you? 13 years old, blonde hair. She went missing from her home about 3 hours ago." I shook my head, suddenly feeling sick. "No, sir, I haven't seen anyone." He nodded, looking disappointed. "Well, you get on home now. It's not safe to be out this late." As he started to pull away, I blurted out, "There's something in the woods." The officer stopped and looked at me. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," I said, suddenly feeling stupid. "Something big. It was following me. I think it might have been a bear." I couldn't bring myself to say what I really thought it was. The officer frowned. "We don't get many bears in this area, but I'll make a note of it. You sure you're okay to walk the rest of the way home?" I nodded and he drove off slowly, scanning the roadside with his spotlight. I jogged the rest of the way home, constantly looking over my shoulder. When I finally got inside, I locked the door behind me and went straight to my room. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, there was news about the missing girl all over the local radio stations. They organized search parties, but they never found her. It was like she just vanished. That wasn't the only disappearance around that time either. About a month before my encounter, an elderly woman had wandered away from the Pine Rest nursing home on the edge of the same woods. She was 80 years old and had dementia. The search for her lasted almost 2 weeks, but they never found a trace. Everyone assumed she'd gotten lost in the woods and died from exposure, but they never found a body. I kept thinking about those disappearances and what I'd seen that night. I couldn't help wondering if they were connected somehow. There was something else too. When I was running past that section of woods, right before I reached the Johnson's place, there was this smell. It's hard to describe, like wet dog mixed with something rotten and musky. I'd never smelled anything like it before or since. That part of the woods had always given me the creeps even before that night. There were rumors about an old cemetery somewhere back in there from the early settlers, though I'd never gone looking for it. The whole area had a weird feeling to it, like the trees were too close together and the shadows were too dark. After that night, I never walked that road alone again. I always got a ride or made sure I was home before dark. I started having nightmares about that shape in the woods, about those heavy footsteps following me. Sometimes in the dreams, I wouldn't be fast enough, and I'd feel hot breath on the back of my neck just before waking up in a cold sweat. I did some research later that year for a school project. I went to the library and found old newspaper clippings about sightings of something similar in Michigan going back decades. Some people called it Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Others had different names for it. Most people treated these stories as jokes or hoaxes, but after what I saw, I couldn't laugh them off. I graduated the next year and moved away for college. I've only been back to visit a few times since then. My parents moved to Florida in the 90s, so there wasn't much reason to go back. But 2 years ago, I had to return for a former co-worker's funeral. I drove past that stretch of road during the daytime. There are more houses now, and the woods have been pushed back a bit. But that feeling came rushing back as soon as I saw those trees. I pulled over and just sat in my car, staring at the woods where I'd seen that thing. In the daylight, it looked so ordinary, just a typical Michigan forest. But I could still feel it watching me, even after all these years. I've told this story to exactly 3 people in my life. My wife, my best friend in college, and a therapist I saw for a while in my 30s. My wife believes me because she trusts me, but I can tell she thinks I might have exaggerated or misremembered things in my fear. My college friend laughed it off as a bear or my imagination. The therapist suggested it was a stress hallucination combined with the power of suggestion from local legends. Maybe they're right. Maybe my 17-year-old mind turned a bear or a deer into something more monstrous. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And to this day, I can't shake the connection between that thing in the woods and those people who went missing and were never found. Sometimes I wonder if I should have told the police officer more, if I should have insisted on what I really saw instead of saying it might have been a bear. Would it have made a difference? Would they have found that missing girl? Or would they have just written me off as another teenager making up stories? I don't walk in the woods anymore, not anywhere. And whenever I hear stories about people going missing in national parks or forests, I think about that night in '83. And I wonder if they ran into something similar to what followed me home. Story 6. I still don't know if I should even be writing this down. It's been months since it happened, but I can't stop thinking about it. Maybe putting it on paper will help me make sense of it all. I need to tell someone what I saw that day. It was April 17th, 1871. I remember the date clearly because I had been collecting census data for weeks, and that particular day I was assigned to the Avondale area in New South Wales. My name is George Osborne, and I'd been working for the colonial government for about 3 years at that point. Census collection was tedious work, but it paid decently and gave me a chance to see parts of the country I wouldn't otherwise visit. That morning started like any other. I woke before sunrise, had a simple breakfast of bread and tea at the boarding house where I was staying, and set out on my horse, Bessie. She was a reliable mare, not easily spooked, which made her perfect for traveling through the bush. I had a leather satchel filled with census forms, a few pencils, my lunch wrapped in cloth, and a canteen of water. The sky was overcast, threatening rain, but I hoped to finish my rounds before any downpour. The Avondale area was sparsely populated with homesteads scattered across rough terrain. Most of the day was spent riding between properties, asking the same questions, filling out the same forms. How many people lived in the household, ages, occupations, place of birth? It was monotonous but necessary work. By mid-afternoon, I had finished with most of the properties on my list. I was making good time despite the increasingly muddy trails. The air was thick with humidity, and my shirt clung uncomfortably to my back. Bessie and I were traveling along a narrow trail that cut through a densely wooded area. The trees formed a canopy overhead, blocking much of the light and giving the forest floor an eerie, greenish glow. I remember checking my pocket watch. It was just past 3 o'clock. I had 2 more homesteads to visit before I could return to town. The trail ahead curved around a massive eucalyptus tree, its trunk wider than 3 men standing side by side. As we approached it, Bessie suddenly stopped. Her ears pricked forward and I could feel her body tense beneath me. "What is it, girl?" I patted her neck, trying to calm her. In the bush, you learn to trust your horse's instincts. They often sense danger before you do. Snakes, dingoes, or even just a change in the weather. That's when I heard it, a strange rustling sound from above. Not like the wind through leaves, but something heavier, deliberate. I looked up into the branches of the eucalyptus and saw movement about 8 feet off the ground. At first, I thought it might be a koala or perhaps a large bird. But what fell from that tree was like nothing I'd ever seen before or since. The creature lost its grip and tumbled down, landing with a heavy thud on the ground about 15 yards ahead of us. Bessie reared up, whinnying in terror. It took all my strength to stay in the saddle and keep her from bolting. "Whoa, easy, girl, easy!" I pulled on the reins, trying to steady her while keeping my eyes fixed on the thing that had fallen from the tree. It scrambled to its feet quickly, in a fluid motion that was disturbingly human-like. Standing upright, it was about 5 feet tall, the size of a 14-year-old boy, perhaps, but any similarity to a human child ended there. The creature was covered in black hair, thick and matted in some places, except for its face and feet. Its proportions were all wrong. Slender body, but with well-developed muscles visible beneath the hair, especially across its chest and shoulders. Its arms were unnaturally long, hanging down almost to its knees. The legs looked almost human, but ended in the most bizarre feet I've ever seen. Enormous, at least 18 inches long, with toes that splayed out like fingers. But it was the face that truly unnerved me. The back of its head was strangely flat, while the face projected forward in a way that wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human. There was a streak of tan-colored hair running from its neck down to its abdomen, standing out starkly against the black. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I couldn't move, partly from fear, partly from shock. It didn't make any sound, just watched me with eyes that seemed to understand exactly what I was. There was intelligence there, awareness, not the mindless gaze of an animal, but something calculating. Then it turned and began to move away, walking upright on those bizarre feet. Every few paces, it would stop and turn around to look at me as if making sure I wasn't following. I noticed it had no tail, which struck me as odd, given its otherwise animal-like appearance. Bessie was still trembling beneath me, making small, nervous movements, desperate to flee. But I held her steady, too fascinated by what I was seeing to leave. "What in God's name are you?" I whispered, though I doubt the creature heard me. As it moved deeper into the bush, I made a decision that in retrospect seems foolish. I decided to follow it at a distance. I'm not sure what compelled me. Scientific curiosity, a need to prove to myself that I wasn't going mad? Whatever the reason, I gently nudged Bessie forward. She resisted at first, but after some coaxing, began to walk slowly in the direction the creature had gone. We stayed on the trail while the being moved through the underbrush about 20 yards ahead. It seemed to be heading toward a ridge in the distance. Following it was difficult. Despite its awkward appearance, it moved with surprising grace and speed through the dense vegetation. Several times I thought I'd lost it, only to catch a glimpse of black hair moving between trees or over rocks. After about 15 minutes of this strange pursuit, we came to a small clearing. The creature had stopped at the edge of it and was crouched down, seemingly examining something on the ground. I pulled Bessie to a halt and watched from a distance. It was using its long fingers to dig in the soil, occasionally bringing something to its mouth. Roots or insects, perhaps. The movement was so deliberate, so purposeful. This was no mindless animal foraging for food. There was method to its actions. Suddenly, without warning, it stood upright again and turned its head in my direction. Even from a distance, I could feel its gaze lock onto me. My heart pounded in my chest. Had I gotten too close? Was it aggressive? I had no weapons, save for a small knife I kept for cutting rope and opening packages. The creature made a sound then, the first noise I'd heard from it. It wasn't a growl or a screech, but something between a hum and a low whistle. The sound sent shivers down my spine. Bessie shifted nervously beneath me. Then something truly extraordinary happened. The creature raised one of its long arms and seemed to gesture at me, not in a threatening way, but almost as if it were beckoning me closer. I froze, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to flee, to gallop back to town and tell everyone what I'd seen. But another part, the part that had made me follow it in the first place, was curious. What was this being? Was it trying to communicate? Before I could decide what to do, the creature suddenly tensed. Its head turned sharply to the right, toward the deeper part of the forest. It seemed to be listening to something I couldn't hear. Then, without another glance in my direction, it dropped to all fours and bounded away with surprising speed, disappearing into the thick underbrush. I sat there on Bessie for several minutes, staring at the spot where it had vanished. The forest had gone quiet. No birds calling, no insects buzzing, just silence. Eventually, I turned Bessie around and headed back to the trail. I tried to continue my census work, but I couldn't focus. My hand shook as I tried to write, and I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that strange being watching me from the trees. I finished my rounds as quickly as possible and rode straight back to town, arriving just as darkness fell. That night, I sat in my room at the boarding house and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. I considered telling someone, but who would believe me? They'd think I was drunk or mad or both. So I kept it to myself, at least for that night. I made detailed notes about the creature's appearance and behavior while it was still fresh in my memory. 5 feet tall, slender but muscular, black hair covering its body except for the face and feet, the tan streak from neck to abdomen, those impossibly long feet with splayed toes, the flat back of the head with the projecting face, the way it looked at me with what seemed like recognition. The next day, I cautiously mentioned to a few locals that I'd seen something strange in the woods. Most laughed it off, or suggested I'd encountered a particularly large kangaroo or a deformed dingo. One old-timer, though, grew serious when I described the creature. "There are things in the bush that white men don't understand," he told me in a low voice. "The Aboriginals have stories of beings that live between our world and the spirit world. Best to leave them be and not speak of them too much." His words didn't comfort me. If anything, they made the experience more unsettling. In the months since, I've tried to find any record of similar sightings. I've spoken discreetly with Aboriginal elders, with hunters, with other government workers who travel the bush. A few have shared stories of strange encounters, though none exactly matching what I saw. I still don't know what it was I encountered that day. Some previously undiscovered species, some kind of deformed human living wild in the bush, something else entirely. I keep coming back to the intelligence in its eyes, the deliberate way it moved, that gesture that seemed to invite me closer. Whatever it wasn't just an animal. I've returned to that area several times since, hoping for another glimpse, but I've seen nothing. Sometimes, though, when I'm riding through similar terrain, I get the distinct feeling of being watched. I'll turn quickly, scanning the trees, but there's never anything there, at least nothing I can see. I know how this sounds. If someone told me this story, I'd think they were making it up or had been out in the sun too long. But I know what I saw. That creature was real, and it was like nothing known to science. The census records for Avondale were submitted, complete and accurate. I did my job, but what I encountered that day in April isn't recorded in any official document. It exists only in my memory, and now in this account. Sometimes I wake in the night, thinking I hear that strange humming whistle outside my window. I wonder if it followed me, if it's been watching me all this time. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd accepted its invitation and moved closer that day in the clearing. What was it trying to show me? Story 7. I'm not the type of person who believes in the paranormal or supernatural. I'm practical, logical, and spent 8 years in the military, followed by a decade working security at a psychiatric facility. I've seen people at their worst, dealt with dangerous situations, and learned to stay calm under pressure. But what happened to me last December has shaken that foundation completely. It was a Thursday night, just 3 weeks before Christmas. I'd picked up an extra shift at work and was driving home around 1:15 in the morning. The roads were empty, just me and my 2018 Dodge Ram on Highway 138, about 15 miles outside of Roseburg, Oregon. The night was clear but cold, probably in the low 30s, with a half moon providing just enough light to see the outlines of the Douglas firs lining the roadway. I was exhausted after a 12-hour shift and had the heat cranked up, listening to some late-night talk radio to keep myself alert. I remember the host was discussing something about holiday travel when I rounded a curve and saw something moving across the highway about 100 yards ahead. My first thought was deer. We get a lot of them out here, especially at night, and hitting one could total your vehicle. I immediately took my foot off the gas and tapped the brake, slowing from about 60 to maybe 40 miles per hour. As I got closer, the shape moved to the side of the road by a barbed wire fence that separates the highway from private timberland. But something wasn't right. This wasn't a deer. The proportions were all wrong. It was standing upright by the fence. My next thought was that maybe it was someone broken down, perhaps trying to flag me down for help. It's not uncommon for cell service to be spotty out here, and I couldn't just drive past someone who might be stranded in the cold. I pulled over about 50 yards past where I'd seen the figure, keeping my headlights on and engine running. I grabbed my mag light from the center console. It's a heavy-duty flashlight I've carried since my military days, and stepped out of the truck. The cold air hit me immediately, making me zip up my jacket as I started walking back along the shoulder toward where I'd seen the figure. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there? Need some help?" There was no response, just the sound of the wind through the trees and the distant hoot of an owl. I swept my flashlight along the fence line, moving the beam methodically back and forth. The fence was standard barbed wire, maybe 4 feet high, with wooden posts every 10 feet or so. Beyond it was a field of tall grass that gave way to dense forest about 50 yards back. That's when I heard it. It started as a high-pitched scream that made the hair on my arm stand up, then dropped into the deepest, most guttural growl I've ever heard. It wasn't a sound that belonged to any animal I recognized. Not a cougar, not a bear, nothing that should exist in these woods. The growl seemed to vibrate the air around me, like I could feel it in my chest cavity. I froze. Whatever instinct for self-preservation we've developed over thousands of years kicked in, and my body went rigid before I even processed what was happening. The sound came from directly where I'd seen the figure standing, but now I couldn't see anything there. The flashlight beam caught movement in the tall grass about 20 feet beyond the fence. Something big was moving, not away from me, but parallel to the fence, like it was pacing. My training has taught me how to handle aggressive humans and even wild animals, but this triggered something else entirely. This was primal fear, the kind our ancestors must have felt when they heard rustling in the dark before humans controlled fire. I don't remember dropping the flashlight, but I must have, because suddenly I was running back to my truck without it. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what was making that sound. I jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it automatically. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled with the gear shift, finally getting it into drive and hitting the gas hard enough that the tires spun on the asphalt before catching. I drove home well above the speed limit, constantly checking my rearview mirror. Nothing followed me that I could see, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even miles down the road. When I got home, I sat in my driveway with the engine running for at least 10 minutes, trying to process what had happened. My wife was asleep when I finally went inside, and I didn't wake her. What would I even say? I took a shower, trying to wash away the fear, but I couldn't stop replaying the encounter in my mind. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that scream growl and saw the movement in the grass. By morning, I'd convinced myself I needed to go back, partly to retrieve my flashlight, that maglite was expensive and had sentimental value, but mostly because I needed to reassure myself there was a logical explanation. I waited until about 10 in the morning. The daylight gave me courage, and I told my wife I needed to run an errand. I didn't mention what had happened. I still wasn't sure myself. The drive back to the spot took about 25 minutes. Everything looks different in daylight, and I had to drive past the area once before recognizing where I'd pulled over. I parked in the same spot and cautiously walked back along the shoulder. My flashlight was there, lying in the gravel just off the pavement. The lens was cracked, but it still worked. I picked it up and stood there for a long time, staring at the fence and the field beyond it. In the daylight, it looked so ordinary. Just a fence, a field and trees. Hard to imagine the terror I'd felt just hours earlier. I walked to where I thought the figure had been standing and examined the area. The ground was hard-packed dirt and gravel, not ideal for leaving footprints. I looked carefully but found nothing definitive. No obvious tracks, no hair caught on the barbed wire, nothing that would prove something unusual had been there. But the tall grass beyond the fence told a different story. There was a clear path where something heavy had moved through it. A swath about 3 feet wide, where the grass was bent and broken. It led from the fence into the tree line. I thought about climbing over to follow it, but decided against it. Whatever had made that sound, I didn't want to encounter it again, especially alone. As I stood there, I tried to piece together exactly what I'd seen the night before. In that moment by the fence, before the sound, I'd gotten a decent look at the figure despite the darkness. What had initially registered as person in my mind clearly wasn't. First, the height. I'm 6'1", and my eyes in my truck are about 6 feet off the ground when I'm sitting in the driver's seat. Whatever I saw had its head level with mine through the window, despite standing in a slight depression that was maybe a foot lower than the roadway. That would put it at 7 feet tall, minimum. Second, the proportions were wrong for a human. There was no distinct neck. The head seemed to flow directly into the shoulders and upper body. The shoulders were incredibly wide and the torso thick, giving it a bulky, powerful appearance. Third, and most disturbing, was the covering. It wasn't wearing clothes, at least not any conventional garments. It was covered in what looked like long, dark hair or fur that hung naturally, not like a costume with seams or artificial lines. As I stood there in the daylight, trying to rationalize what I'd seen, I realized that my initial impression of a person was way off. This was something else entirely, more animal than human, but unlike any animal native to Oregon. I took some photos of the disturbed grass with my phone, though they don't really show much, just broken vegetation that could have been caused by anything. I walked the fence line for about 100 yards in each direction, but found nothing else unusual. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about the sound. That's what haunts me the most. The scream that became a growl seemed like a warning, territorial, aggressive, unmistakably directed at me. Whatever made it wanted me to know I was unwelcome, that I was in danger if I stayed. It's been almost 3 months now, and I still drive a different route home from work. I've told a few close friends about what happened, but most just suggest it was a bear or mountain lion. I've encountered both in my lifetime, and this was neither. Some have suggested a man in a ghillie suit or hunting blind, but that doesn't explain the height, the proportions, or that ungodly sound. I've spent hours researching online, looking at reports of strange encounters in the Pacific Northwest. There are plenty of stories about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but I've always dismissed those as folklore or misidentifications. Now, I'm not so sure. I don't know what I saw that night on Highway 138, but it wasn't human, and it wasn't any recognized animal species I'm familiar with. I keep thinking I should report it to someone, wildlife officials maybe. But what would I say? That I saw something impossibly tall and hairy by the roadside that made a sound that turned my blood to ice. They'd think I was crazy or drunk, so I keep it mostly to myself, driving different routes home, checking my rearview mirror more often, and avoiding being out on those roads after dark. Whatever it was real. The broken grass was real. The sound was real. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I can still hear that scream growl echoing in my head, reminding me that there are things in this world that don't fit into our neat categories of what should and shouldn't exist. Story 8. I've been bow hunting for over 20 years now, but what happened last week has left me completely shaken. I've told my wife and my brother, but they both look at me like I've lost my mind. Maybe writing this out will help me process it, because I know what I saw, and it wasn't a bear, a deer, or anything else that's supposed to be in these woods. It was October 7th, 2024. Perfect hunting weather, about 45 degrees with a light breeze from the northwest. I'd been planning this hunt for months, scouting the area near the Wabash River where I've taken deer for the past few seasons. I arrived before dawn, climbed up to my tree stand around 20 feet up in this massive old oak, and settled in for the morning. My stand gives me a great vantage point. I can see clear across open ground for at least a quarter mile in most directions, with a perfect view of a thicket that borders a patch of pine woods where the deer often come through. I'd been sitting there for maybe 3 hours, just watching and waiting. The sun had been up for a while, burning off the morning fog, and I was starting to think maybe I wouldn't see anything that day. Around 9:30 in the morning, I noticed some movement in the thicket about 40 yards away. At first I thought, finally a deer. and I slowly reached for my bow. But what stepped into partial view wasn't a deer, not even close. I'm still struggling to find the right words to describe what I saw. It was walking upright like a person, but it definitely wasn't human. The thing was massive. I'd estimate at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. It had this hulking frame with incredibly broad shoulders, way broader than any person I've ever seen. The build was almost like a gorilla, but with proportionally longer legs. If I had to guess, it probably weighed around 400 pounds, maybe more. What really struck me was how it was covered in this dark brown, rough-looking hair. Not fur exactly, more like long hair that hung down off its arms and back. I couldn't see its face clearly, it never turned toward me, but I could make out the silhouette of what looked like a slightly conical head, no real neck to speak of. Just this massive head that seemed to sit directly on those enormous shoulders. The strangest part was how it moved. This thing was huge, walking through a dense thicket, but it barely disturbed the vegetation. I could see the tops of the brush shift slightly as it passed, but there was no crashing sound, no breaking branches, nothing. It moved with this eerie, deliberate grace that made no sense for something so large. I'm 6'1", 200 pounds, and I can't move through those thickets without sounding like a bulldozer. I sat there frozen, bow in hand, barely breathing. It crossed about 30 yards of open space inside the brush in maybe 20 seconds, never looking up or turning, just walking steadily toward the river. The whole time I was fighting the urge to make a sound or move. Every instinct told me to stay absolutely still. My heart was pounding so hard I was worried the thing might hear it. I've faced down angry bucks and even had a close encounter with a black bear once, but nothing has ever made me feel so utterly small and vulnerable as watching this creature. There was something deeply unsettling about how it moved, like it knew exactly where it was going and nothing was going to get in its way. When it finally disappeared from view, heading toward the river, I let out the breath I'd been holding. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to put my bow down. I debated climbing down right then and there, but the thought of being on the ground, potentially crossing paths with whatever that was, I couldn't do it. So I stayed put for another hour, constantly scanning the area, jumping at every sound. Eventually, I worked up the courage to climb down. The whole time, I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched. I practically jogged back to my truck, looking behind me every few steps. I've never felt that kind of fear in the woods before, and I've been hunting since I was a kid. When I got home, I tried to tell my wife what I'd seen. She looked concerned, but I could tell she thought I was exaggerating or maybe had dozed off in my stand and dreamed it. But I know what I saw. I was wide awake, the conditions were clear, and I had a good line of sight. The thing is, this isn't completely out of the blue. My son Jason had been hunting this same area last season and came back talking about weird sounds he couldn't identify. Not quite howls, not quite screams, but something in between that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. I'd written it off at the time as coyotes or maybe a bobcat, but now I'm not so sure. I've spent the past week trying to rationalize what I saw. Could it have been a bear walking on its hind legs? No way. The proportions were all wrong, and it moved too smoothly, too deliberately. A person in a suit, out in the middle of nowhere, moving silently through thick brush without any gear, and who could possibly be that big? I keep coming back to the same conclusion. As crazy as it sounds, what I saw was a Bigfoot. I've never been one for cryptid stories or paranormal stuff. I'm a practical guy. I work in construction. I deal with tangible things. But there's no other explanation that fits what I saw. I went back to the area 2 days later in broad daylight with my buddy Mike. I didn't tell him exactly what I was looking for, just said I wanted to check if there were any unusual tracks around. We found a few broken branches along the path where I'd seen the creature, but the ground was too covered in leaves and pine needles to show clear footprints. Mike noticed I was on edge and kept asking what was up, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him. He already thinks I'm getting too old for solo hunting trips. What's really bothering me is the feeling that this thing might have been aware of me the whole time. It never looked in my direction, never gave any indication it knew I was there, but something in my gut tells me it knew. Maybe that's why it didn't look up. It didn't need to, and that thought keeps me up at night. I haven't been back to hunt since. My stand is still up there, and deer season is in full swing, but I can't bring myself to sit up in that tree again. Not yet, anyway. Every time I think about it, I see that silhouette moving through the thicket, and my stomach knots up. I've spent hours online reading about Bigfoot sightings near the Wabash River. Turns out there have been reports going back decades. Not a ton, but enough to make me think I'm not crazy. Some of the descriptions match almost exactly what I saw. The height, the build, the way it moved. There's even a report from 2018 about a fisherman who saw something similar crossing the river at dawn, about 2 miles downstream from my hunting spot. The local DNR office wouldn't take my reports seriously. The guy I spoke to actually laughed and said they get Bigfoot reports every hunting season from people who've had too much whiskey in their coffee. I hadn't been drinking, never do when I'm hunting, but I could tell he wasn't going to listen no matter what I said. My brother suggested setting up trail cameras in the area. Part of me wants to know if it's still out there, but another part is afraid of what I might catch on film. What if it comes back and finds the cameras? Would it see that as a threat? I know that sounds paranoid, but after seeing something that supposedly doesn't exist, my definition of paranoid has shifted. Last night, I dreamed I was back in my stand, and the creature was looking up at me, just standing there, staring, with these deep-set eyes. I woke up in a cold sweat at 3 in the morning and couldn't get back to sleep. I'm not sure what to do now. I love hunting. It's been a huge part of my life. But the thought of going back into those woods makes my chest tight. I keep wondering if this thing has been there all along, watching me season after season while I sat oblivious in my tree stand, thinking I was the observer, not the observed. The most unsettling thought is that I've probably walked right past it before, maybe many times, and never knew it was there. How many other hunters have done the same? How is something that big able to stay hidden so effectively? I'm writing this all down while it's still fresh in my mind. I don't have proof, no photos, no footprints, nothing concrete to show anyone, just what I saw with my own eyes. But I know it was real. I've been replaying those 20 seconds over and over in my head, and the details don't change. The way its hair moved with each step, the slight sway of its shoulders, the deliberate placement of each foot. Tomorrow I'm going to call Jason and ask him more about those sounds he heard. Maybe he saw something too and was afraid to say it outright. Maybe this thing has been watching my family hunt for generations. The Wabash has always felt like home to me. Now it feels like someone else's territory that I've been trespassing on, and I can't shake the feeling that one day the owner might decide to do something about it. Story 9. It was supposed to be a routine trip. I'd heard about some great spots for winter photography up in the Cascades, and with a couple of days off work, I decided to head out early and catch the morning light. The forecast mentioned fog, but I figured that might actually make for some interesting shots. I loaded my camera gear into my Toyota 4Runner, an older model but reliable on forest roads, and set out around 5 in the morning. The drive started out normal enough. I had my thermos of coffee, some trail mix, and was listening to an old CD as I made my way up from Arlington toward Darrington. As I got deeper into the mountains, the radio signal died, and I was left with just the sound of my tires on the pavement. About 20 minutes past Darrington, I turned onto an unpaved Forest Service road. I'd researched it beforehand. It would lead me to a viewpoint overlooking a valley that was supposed to be spectacular at sunrise. The fog was getting thicker the higher I climbed. My headlights only illuminated maybe 30 feet ahead, and I had slowed to about 15 miles per hour, carefully navigating the ruts and occasional rocks in the road. I remember checking my watch. It was just after 6:30 in the morning, still dark, with just a hint of grey starting to lighten the eastern sky behind the mountains. The temperature gauge on my dashboard read 28 degrees. I remember these details vividly because everything changed just moments later. I came around a bend in the road, not sharp, just a gentle curve, and suddenly slammed on my brakes. My SUV skidded slightly on the dirt road before coming to a complete stop. Through the fog and my headlights, there was something standing directly in the middle of the road. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. My initial thought was bear, but immediately I knew that wasn't right. This was standing upright, completely vertical, and much, much larger than any bear I'd ever seen or photographed. As my headlights illuminated it, I realized I was looking at what could only be described as a Sasquatch. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I know. I've spent the last 15 years trying to rationalize what I saw, but I can't. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. Its entire body was covered in dark brown hair, not like fur exactly, more like very thick human hair, but all over. The hair seemed matted in places, especially around what I assume were its shoulders. Its arms were proportionally all wrong for a human. They hung down at its sides, the hands ending well past where a person's would, almost to its knees. Its chest was barrel-shaped, enormous, probably twice as wide as mine, and its legs, they were like tree trunks, thick and powerful looking, but it was the face that I'll never forget. It didn't have much of a neck. The head just kind of sat on top of those massive shoulders. Heavy brow ridges shadowed its eyes, but I could see them clearly enough in my headlights. And then it looked directly at me. I'm a wildlife photographer. I've had staring contests with grizzlies in Alaska and mountain lions in the Rockies, but nothing prepared me for the intelligence I saw in those eyes. There was something deeply unsettling about it. Not animal, not human, but somehow aware, conscious in a way that made my skin crawl. We locked eyes for what felt like minutes, but was probably only 5 or 6 seconds. Then it did something I'll never forget. It pulled back its upper lip, not quite a snarl, but showing teeth that looked yellowish in my headlights, and it howled. I've heard wolf howls, elk bugling, even the scream of a mountain lion once. This was different. It started as a low rumble that I could actually feel inside my chest, then rose to a howl that seemed to vibrate the entire SUV. I swear the coffee in my cup holder rippled like that scene from Jurassic Park. The sound physically went through me, and I felt a primal fear I've never experienced before or since. I was frozen. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, knuckles white. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. My brain kept screaming, "This isn't possible," while my eyes were telling me it absolutely was. Without warning, the creature took a step toward my vehicle. One massive stride brought it right to the front of my 4Runner. Then it did something that still gives me nightmares. It raised one enormous hand and slammed it down onto the hood of my SUV. The entire vehicle shook. The metal actually dented under its hand. I still had that dent when I finally sold the truck years later. I couldn't believe the size of its hand. It nearly covered the entire hood scoop. The palm was a grayish color, different from the hair on the rest of its body, and looked cracked and weathered, like old leather that's been out in the elements too long. Its fingers ended in thick, dark nails. Not claws exactly, but definitely not human fingernails either. For several seconds, probably 10, maybe 15, it just stood there with its hand pressing down on my hood. I could hear the metal creaking under the pressure. Its breath was fogging up my windshield in great clouds of vapor. The smell found its way into my vents, a musty, wild odor like wet dog mixed with something else I can't describe. I was certain I was about to die, that it would rip the door off or smash through the windshield. My camera was sitting on the passenger seat, but I never even thought to reach for it. I was paralyzed with fear. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it seemed to lose interest. It lifted its hand from my hood and took a step back. It stared at me for another moment, then turned and stepped off the road into the forest. I watched as it moved away. Its back was incredibly broad. and it walked with a strange gait. Its knees bent differently than a human's, almost like it was bobbing slightly with each step. It pushed past branches that would have been head level for most people without even ducking. And then it was gone. I sat there for what must have been at least 20 minutes, unable to move. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even turn the key in the ignition at first. When I finally managed to pull myself together, I threw the SUV into reverse and backed up until I found a wide spot to turn around. I drove back down that mountain road at a speed that was probably more dangerous than whatever I'd just encountered. When I got back to the main highway, I pulled over at the first place I could. A small gas station near Darrington. The attendant asked if I was okay. Apparently, I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I mumbled something about almost hitting a deer and went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. That's when I remembered the hood of my SUV. I went back out and sure enough, there was a massive dent in the metal. But more than that, there was a smeared mark of dirt and some kind of oil or grease across the surface. I could make out what looked like fingerprints, much larger than any human hand. There were also 4 faint scratches in the paint where its fingers had dragged across when it pulled away. I didn't report it to anyone official. What would I say? Who would believe me? I took some photos of the hood when I got home, but they just looked like a dirty, dented hood. Nothing that proves what caused it. I've gone back and forth 100 times about what I saw that morning. Was it really a Sasquatch? Could it have been some kind of bear with mange? A person in a suit playing a prank? But I know what I saw. The size, the proportions, the intelligence in those eyes. No bear stands like that. No human is that large or moves that way. And who would be out in the freezing cold at dawn on a remote forest road, waiting to scare a random driver? The experience changed me. I used to love solo trips into remote areas. Now I'm always looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. I sold that 4Runner a couple years later. Couldn't stand looking at the dent and remembering. I still take photos, but I stick to places where there are other people around. I've only told this story to a couple of close friends, and even they gave me that look. The one that says they think I'm either lying or was confused about what I saw, but I know what happened. On a foggy February morning in 2008, on a remote forest road near Darrington, Washington, I came face to face with something that shouldn't exist. And it looked right back at me, with eyes that knew exactly what I was. That handprint on my hood, that was real. The dent was real. The fear I felt was real. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I swear I can still hear that howl echoing in my head, feel it vibrating in my chest. And I know beyond any doubt that what I encountered was real too. Story 10. I still haven't wrapped my head around what happened last fall. I'm not the type who goes around telling crazy stories or believes in all that paranormal stuff. Never been interested in ghost hunting shows or cryptid podcasts, but after what I saw at Lake Catherine, I've been questioning everything. It was September 23rd, 2019. I remember the date clearly because I'd marked it on my calendar weeks in advance. Late September is prime pawpaw season in southern Illinois, and I'd been looking forward to harvesting some all year. If you've never had a pawpaw, they're these incredible native fruits, kind of like a cross between a banana and a mango with a custard texture. They're hard to find in stores because they don't ship or store well, so you have to forage them yourself. I'd found an amazing spot at Lake Catherine in Jackson County the year before. Stumbled on it by accident while hiking and ended up taking home about 15 pounds of perfect pawpaws. The memory of that pawpaw ice cream I made still makes my mouth water. So naturally, I was eager to repeat my success. It was a Monday, and I'd taken the day off work specifically for pawpaw hunting. The weather was perfect, about 65 degrees, slightly overcast but not threatening rain. I wore my usual hiking gear, sturdy boots, cargo pants with plenty of pockets for collecting, and a light jacket. I brought 2 canvas bags for the fruit and a walking stick I always carry when I'm in the woods. I arrived at Lake Catherine around 2 in the afternoon, The parking lot was completely empty, which wasn't surprising for a weekday. I've always preferred foraging alone anyway. Fewer people means more pawpaws for me. I locked my car, put my keys in my zippered pocket, and headed down the trail toward my spot from last year. The trail was overgrown, more than I remembered. It looked like not many people had been through recently. The pawpaw patch was about a 20-minute walk from the parking area down a gradually sloping path that eventually opened up into a small clearing near a seasonal creek. The pawpaw trees grow in the dappled shade at the edge of this clearing. When I finally reached the spot, I immediately knew something was off. The trees were there, but they looked different, picked over. I walked up to the first cluster of pawpaw trees and scanned the branches. Nothing, not a single fruit hanging from any of the trees. I checked the ground, thinking maybe they'd ripened early and fallen, but there were no rotting fruits, no seeds, nothing to indicate there had been any pawpaws at all. I spent about 45 minutes searching the entire grove. There were maybe 20 to 25 pawpaw trees in this area, and every single one was bare. This made no sense. Pawpaw trees are pretty reliable producers year after year, unless there's a late frost that kills the flowers. But we'd had a normal spring, and even if animals had gotten some of the fruit, they wouldn't have stripped every single tree completely clean. There would be some evidence, half-eaten fruits, seeds, something. After realizing my trip was a bust, I decided to head back. I was disappointed and a little confused, but not scared or anything. Not yet. I took one last look at the barren trees, sighed, and turned to walk back up the trail toward my car. I'd gone maybe 50 yards when I heard it, a rustling sound coming from a dense stand of trees, about 10 to 15 yards off the trail to my right. My first thought was deer. They're common in the area, and the sound was substantial enough to be something larger than a squirrel. I stopped walking and turned to look. The rustling continued, and then I noticed a tree limb moving about 6 feet off the ground. Now, a 6-foot-high branch doesn't move unless something pretty big is disturbing it. My mind immediately went to a turkey, or maybe a raccoon climbing. I was curious, so I took a few steps off the trail to get a better angle. That's when everything changed. As I shifted position to peer around a thicket of smaller trees, I saw it. Behind one of the larger oaks was a head, a large black head that quickly ducked behind the tree trunk as soon as I moved. It was only visible for a split second, but that was enough to send ice through my veins. This wasn't a deer or a turkey. The head was massive, easily the size of a basketball, if not bigger. The color was a deep, matte black, not the glossy black of a bear's fur, and the movement, the deliberate way it pulled back behind the tree, that was the most unsettling part. It moved with purpose, with awareness, like it knew I had spotted it and was hiding. I froze completely, couldn't have moved if I wanted to. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Time seemed to stretch out as I stood there, staring at the tree where the head had disappeared. I don't know how long I actually stood there, probably only 20 or 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. My brain was struggling to process what I'd seen. A bear? No, we don't have black bears regularly in this part of Illinois, and the shape wasn't right anyway. A person in dark clothing? Maybe. But who would be hiding behind trees and ducking away when seen? And the size? It was just too big for a normal human head. I realized I was holding my breath and made myself exhale slowly. The woods had gone completely silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just dead silence, except for the sound of my own breathing, which seemed thunderously loud. I kept my eyes fixed on that tree, waiting to see if whatever it was would show itself again. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched intently by something intelligent. Slowly, I began to back away, not wanting to turn my back on whatever was hiding there. My foot caught on a root and I stumbled slightly. At that exact moment, There was another rustle from behind the tree, louder this time, like something large shifting its weight. That broke my paralysis. I turned and walked quickly back to the trail, fighting the urge to run. Every instinct was screaming at me to sprint, but some part of my brain kept insisting that running might trigger a chase response. So I walked, fast, but still walking, while my skin crawled with the certainty that something was watching me go. Once I hit the main trail, I did speed up considerably, not quite running, but a very rapid hike. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something massive and dark emerging from the trees behind me. Nothing ever did, but that almost made it worse. The uncertainty, the not knowing if it was following just out of sight, was maddening. The 20-minute walk back to the parking lot took maybe 12 minutes at my accelerated pace. With each step, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was just another hiker in dark clothing, but why would they hide? And why were they off-trail in dense underbrush? Maybe it was some kind of animal I just couldn't identify in that split second. But what animal has a head that large and moves in that deliberate way? By the time my car came into view, I was sweating despite the cool weather. My hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to get my keys out of my pocket. As I fumbled with the lock, I took one last look back down the trail, and that's when I noticed something that turned my blood to ice. About 100 yards back, where the trail curved around a large boulder, something dark was visible just at the edge of the tree line. It was mostly hidden, but I could make out what looked like a portion of a massive shoulder and the side of that same black head, partially obscured by foliage. It was standing perfectly still, watching me. I practically dove into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine in one frantic motion. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something huge emerge from the woods and come charging after my car. Nothing did, and I made it to the main road without incident. It wasn't until I was about 5 miles away that my breathing started to return to normal. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd just experienced. And that's when another thought hit me. The pawpaws, all the trees, completely stripped of fruit, no evidence of harvesting by humans or normal wildlife, just gone. I've spent months researching what I might have seen that day. I've looked into black bears, though they're extremely rare in southern Illinois. I've considered the possibility of another human, maybe a homeless person living in the woods. I've even read about large birds like wild turkeys that can appear surprisingly large when perched in trees. Nothing fits what I saw. And then, about 2 months after the incident, I stumbled across a forum where people were discussing Bigfoot sightings in the Midwest. I've never been a believer in that sort of thing, but some of the descriptions gave me chills. The large, dark head, the deliberate movement, the intelligence behind the actions. And most interestingly, several accounts mentioned these creatures having a fondness for certain wild fruits, including pawpaws. I don't know what I encountered at Lake Catherine that day. I'm still not fully convinced it was a Bigfoot or any other cryptid. But I know what I saw wasn't a normal animal or a person. The size, the movement, the deliberate way it hid, it was something else, something that doesn't fit into the neat categories of wildlife I'm familiar with. I haven't been back to Lake Catherine since. I've found other pawpaw patches in different parts of the state, but sometimes, when I'm in the woods alone, I catch myself scanning the trees, looking for movement about 6 feet off the ground. And I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, whatever I saw is still watching, still hiding, and still harvesting all the pawpaws before I can get to them. Story 11. I've never really told this story to people outside my family. It's not the kind of thing you bring up at parties or job interviews. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has seen something similar. This happened back in the fall of 1967. I was 12 years old, living in Midland County, Michigan. It was a rural area, lots of open fields, patches of woods, and houses spread way out from each other. We lived about 3/4 of a mile from where our school bus dropped us off, down this lonely gravel road that hardly anyone ever drove on. That day started like any other school day, nothing special about it. Just a regular Wednesday in October. The weather was getting cooler and the leaves were changing. I remember wearing my blue jacket that was getting too small for me, but my mum insisted I'd make it through one more winter with it. After school, the bus dropped us off at the usual spot. Me, my little sister, she was 9, and 4 other neighborhood kids who lived along the same road. The oldest of us was 13, and the youngest was 7. We weren't friends exactly, but we were the gravel road kids who always walked home together. Our bus driver, Mr. Sullivan, was always in a hurry. He'd barely wait for us to get off before he'd close the doors and drive away. That day was no different. We watched the yellow bus disappear around the bend, and then we started our walk home. The gravel crunched under our feet as we walked. We were doing the usual kid stuff, kicking rocks, talking about homework, complaining about teachers. My sister was telling me about some art project she was working on. I wasn't really listening. I was tired and just wanted to get home. About halfway down the road, there was this deep, wide ditch that ran alongside it. It was maybe 6 feet deep and twice as wide. In the spring, it would fill with water, but this time of year it was mostly dry, with just a trickle at the bottom. The sides were steep and sandy. We were passing this ditch when I noticed something from the corner of my eye. Something moved. At first I thought it was just leaves or a shadow, but something made me turn and look directly at it. I froze. Right there, climbing out of the ditch, was something I'd never seen before. It was covered in dark hair. Not fur exactly, more like long, matted hair. It had been lying on the slope of the ditch, almost like it was hiding, waiting for us to pass. But now it was moving, pulling itself up onto the road. "Look," I said, grabbing my sister's arm. The other kid stopped too. The thing stood up on 2 legs. That's when I realized it was shaped like a person, but not a person at all. It was about 5.5, maybe 6 feet tall, not gigantic, but bigger than any of us kids. Not as big as my dad, but close. For a second, it just stood there, looking at us. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was all dark and the hair covered most of it, but I could feel it watching us. Then it moved. It didn't run away from us exactly. It took a couple of quick steps across the road, then jumped over the ditch on the other side in one leap. There was a wooden fence there, about 5 feet high, meant to keep in the ponies that old Mr. Benson kept in that field. This thing jumped over that fence like it was nothing, just sailed right over it without even touching it. Then it ran. It ran faster than anything I'd ever seen. Across that open field, heading toward the tree line about 1,500 feet away. There were ponies in that field, and they started running too, spooked by this thing. But it outran them easily. The ponies couldn't keep up. The whole thing probably lasted less than 30 seconds, from the moment it climbed out of the ditch to when it disappeared into the trees on the other side of the field. None of us said anything for what felt like forever. Then all at once, everyone started talking and screaming. The little kids were crying. My sister was squeezing my arm so hard it hurt. "What was that?" she kept asking. "Danny, what was that?" I didn't know what to tell her. I'd never seen anything like it before. This was 1967, remember? There weren't TV shows about Bigfoot or anything like that, at least not that I'd ever seen. I'd never even heard the word Bigfoot back then. "I don't know," I told her. "Maybe it was a bear." But I knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't run on 2 legs like that. They don't jump fences. They don't move that fast. We practically ran the rest of the way home. The other kids split off to their houses, and my sister and I burst through our front door, out of breath and scared out of our minds. My mom was in the kitchen making dinner. "What's wrong with you two?" she asked, looking concerned. We both started talking at once, trying to explain what we'd seen. I don't think we made much sense. Mom thought we were making it up, or that we'd seen a deer or something. But when my dad got home from work and we told him, He took it more seriously. He was a hunter and knew all the animals in our area. When I described what we saw, he got this strange look on his face. "Show me where," he said. So the next morning before school, he drove us down to the spot. The ditch was still there, of course, the fence across the road, the field beyond. It all looked so normal in the morning light. Dad got out of the truck and looked around. He walked over to the ditch and studied the sandy slope where I'd seen the thing lying. He crossed the road and examined the fence, then walked along the edge of the field for a while. "If it was a bear," he said finally, "there'd be tracks. The ground's soft enough here." But there weren't any tracks, at least none that he could find. No bear tracks, no human tracks, nothing. "Maybe we imagined it," I said, though I knew we hadn't. Dad looked at me for a long moment. "6 of you saw the same thing at the same time." When he put it that way, it did seem unlikely that we'd all imagined it. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about that thing, the way it moved, how fast it ran. I'd lie in bed at night and imagine it standing outside my window, watching me. I started keeping my curtains closed all the time. My sister was even worse off. She refused to walk home from the bus stop for months. Dad had to drive down and pick us up every day, which he wasn't happy about, but he did it. The strangest thing was, when we finally did start walking from the bus stop again, we never took that route. There was another way home, longer, but it went past more houses. None of us kids ever wanted to walk past that ditch again. Over the years, magazines, I wondered if that's what we'd seen. The descriptions matched in some ways, the hair covering the body, the way it walked on 2 legs. But most Bigfoot reports describe creatures that were 8 or 9 feet tall. What we saw wasn't that big. I've also wondered if it could have been a person in some kind of costume. But who would do that? Why hide in a ditch to scare some kids? And how could anyone run that fast, jump that high? It didn't make sense. Sometimes, I've even wondered if it was just a weird-looking bear. Maybe it had some disease that made it lose its fur. Maybe it was standing up because it was injured. But deep down, I know that's not it either. The memory of that day has stayed with me for decades now. It's still vivid. I can close my eyes and see that thing climbing out of the ditch, running across that field. I can still feel the fear, the confusion, the sense that the world suddenly contained things I couldn't understand. My sister remembers it too. We don't talk about it much, but a few years ago at Thanksgiving, after a few glasses of wine, she brought it up. "Do you ever think about that thing we saw when we were kids?" she asked. I knew exactly what she meant. The other kids who were there that day, I've lost touch with all of them. They moved away, or I did. I don't know if they remember it the way I do, if it affected them the way it affected me. I'm 55 years old now. I've got kids of my own, grown up now. I never told them this story. I'm not sure why. Maybe I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. Maybe I was afraid they would. I still don't know what we saw that day. I've read about Bigfoot sightings, watched documentaries, even looked at websites where people share their encounters. Some of the stories sound similar to mine, some don't. I've never found an explanation that fully satisfies me. All I know is what I saw. Something not human, not animal, at least not any animal I recognized, watching us from that ditch, then running with impossible speed across that field. Something that left no tracks, no evidence, nothing but a memory that's haunted me for over 40 years. Sometimes I drive back to that area when I visit Michigan. The road is paved now, there are more houses. The ditch is still there, though it's been reshaped and lined with concrete in some parts. Mr. Benson's field is a subdivision now, full of nearly identical houses. The trees where the thing disappeared are long gone. It all looks so ordinary, so normal. It's hard to believe that something so strange, so unexplainable happened in such an ordinary place. But it did. I was there, I saw it, and no matter how much time passes, I know what I saw. Story 12. I've been holding this in for years, thinking I'd be called crazy. Even now my hands are trembling as I type this. I need to tell someone what happened that October day in 1874. I was just 15 then, working as a farmhand for the millers in Berks County, Pennsylvania. What I saw that day, I still can't explain it. It was unusually cold that morning, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. The sky was overcast, threatening rain, and the trees were just starting to show their fall colors. I remember because Mr. Miller had me up before dawn to help with the morning chores, feeding the animals, collecting eggs, the usual stuff. The Millers had a decent-sized farm about 2 miles outside of town, mostly sheep and pigs, with a few chickens and a couple of dairy cows. Mrs. Miller was known for her butter at the local market. Their farm backed up to a dense forest that stretched for miles into the hills. We'd occasionally lose a chicken to foxes, but nothing prepared us for what was coming. I first knew something was wrong when I approached the pig pen. The gate was completely torn off its hinges, not just open, ripped clean off. The metal was bent and twisted like it was nothing more than paper. 2 of our biggest pigs were missing. There was blood on the ground, not a lot, but enough to see something had happened. Must have been wolves, Mr. Miller said when I showed him, but I'd seen wolf attacks before. Wolves don't bend metal gates. That same day, we heard that the Thompsons down the road had lost 3 sheep overnight. Their fence had been smashed through, not dug under like predators usually do. People started talking, but no one knew what to make of it. Later that afternoon, I was splitting firewood near the edge of the property when I heard it for the first time. A sound I'll never forget as long as I live. It wasn't quite a howl, not exactly a scream either. It was somewhere in between, but louder than anything I'd ever heard. It echoed through the trees, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. The sound was so powerful, I could feel it in my chest. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Every instinct told me to run, but I was frozen in place. That's when our dog, Rex, took off into the woods, barking like mad. I called after him, but he was gone. I waited there, axe in hand, for what felt like forever. Then Rex came tearing back out of the forest, whimpering and terrified. I'd never seen him like that. This was a dog that would chase off bears without hesitation. Whatever he saw in those woods scared him so badly that he hid under the porch for 2 days after. That night at dinner, Mr. Miller told us that the town was organizing hunting parties to look for whatever was stealing livestock. They were thinking maybe a bear, but no one had ever seen a bear act like this in these parts. I remember Mrs. Miller saying, "Bears don't laugh, George." Everyone at the table went quiet. "What do you mean bears don't laugh?" Mr. Miller asked her. "I heard it this morning while hanging laundry," she said. "It sounded like a man laughing, but wrong somehow. Too deep, too hollow." I felt sick to my stomach hearing her describe it, because I'd heard it too, after that first scream in the woods. I just hadn't wanted to admit it to myself. The next morning, Mr. Miller joined one of the hunting parties. He told me to stay behind and keep an eye on things. I spent the day doing chores, constantly looking over my shoulder. Every sound made me jump. By late afternoon, I was so on edge that when Mrs. Miller dropped a pot in the kitchen, I nearly fell off the ladder I was using to fix a loose board on the barn. The sun was starting to set when I heard men shouting in the distance. The hunting party was returning, and from the sounds of it, something had happened. I ran to the front of the property to meet them. There were 6 men, Mr. Miller among them, all looking pale and shaken. Mr. Thompson had a nasty gash on his arm that Mrs. Miller rushed to bandage. "We found tracks," Mr. Miller told me quietly, "like nothing I've ever seen. Bigger than a man's hand, with claws at the end. And we found fur caught on a tree, coarse, dark hair too long to be a bear's." Mr. Thompson spoke up as Mrs. Miller wrapped his arm. "We followed the tracks to Kramer's ravine. That's when we saw it." Everyone went silent, waiting for him to continue. It was huge, 7 feet tall at least, covered in dark hair. At first it was on all fours, digging through something on the ground. One of the men stepped on a branch, and it turned toward us. He paused, swallowing hard. It stood up on 2 legs, looking right at us. Its eyes, God help me, its eyes were too aware, too knowing. We all raised our rifles, Mr. Miller continued, but it moved so fast, knocked Thompson down as it ran past. We fired, but I don't think we hit it. That night, nobody slept well. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind had us sitting up in bed. Mr. Miller kept his rifle by the door. I had a pitchfork next to my cot in the small room off the kitchen where I slept. The next morning, I was collecting eggs when I saw it. At the edge of the forest, partially hidden by trees but clearly visible, stood the creature. Even hunched over, it was massive. Dark brown hair covered its entire body. Its shoulders were twice as broad as a man's. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, the basket of eggs hanging loosely from my hand. The creature and I stared at each other across the field for what felt like an eternity. Then it moved, dropping to all fours with unnatural speed and grace for something so large. That's when I noticed the sheep's carcass behind it. One of our sheep, its wool unmistakable. The creature grabbed the dead animal with one massive hand, a hand I could clearly see was at least twice the size of a human's, and dragged it back into the woods. I dropped the eggs and ran to the house, shouting for Mr. Miller. By the time we returned with rifles, the creature was gone, leaving only trampled grass and blood where the sheep had been. More hunting parties formed over the next few days. The stories spread throughout Berks County. Everyone had either seen the creature or knew someone who had. It was always described the same way: 7 feet tall, heavily muscled, covered in hair, with hands and feet double the size of a man's. And everyone mentioned the sounds it made. The unholy screams that echoed for miles, the laughter that wasn't quite human. A week after the first sightings, I had my closest encounter. I was bringing in the horses from the pasture as dusk approached. The days were getting shorter, and the darkness seemed to fall suddenly that evening. I had just secured the last horse when I heard heavy breathing behind me. I turned slowly, and there it was, standing in the open doorway of the barn. The creature blocked the entire entrance. In the dim light, I could make out its massive form, the way its chest heaved with each breath. Its eyes caught what little light there was, reflecting back at me like a cat's. I backed away slowly until I hit the wall. The pitchfork I'd been using to spread hay was just a few feet away, but it might as well have been miles. I couldn't move. The creature took a step forward, and I noticed how its feet, massive, elongated things with visible claws, left deep impressions in the dirt floor. It cocked its head to one side, studying me with what I can only describe as curiosity. Then it made a sound, not the scream everyone had heard, but a low rumbling that started in its chest and built until it burst from its mouth in that terrible hollow laugh that Mrs. Miller had described. The sound froze my blood. I thought I was going to die right there. Instead, the creature suddenly turned its head toward the house where voices could be heard. Without warning, it dropped to all fours and bolted from the barn, moving with a speed that something that size shouldn't possess. Minutes later, Mr. Miller found me still pressed against the wall, unable to speak. It took several glasses of whiskey before I could tell him what happened. The creature continued to plague Berks County for 3 more weeks. Livestock disappeared almost nightly. People reported seeing it cross roads, lurk at the edges of fields, or watch their homes from the tree line. Then, as suddenly as the sightings began, they stopped. No more livestock went missing, no more inhuman screams echoed through the night. Some folks said the hunting parties had finally scared it off. Others believed it had simply moved on to new hunting grounds. Whatever it was, it left its mark on Berks County. People didn't let their children play outside alone for months afterward. Farmers reinforced their livestock pens with stronger materials, and nobody went into the woods alone if they could help it. It's been years since that October, but I still wake up sometimes hearing that laugh. I've told myself it must have been a bear, deformed somehow, or maybe some kind of mountain lion we'd never seen before. But deep down, I know better. What I saw walking on two legs, what looked at me with those intelligent eyes, what laughed like a man, but wasn't a man. That was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist in this world. I moved away from Berks County the following spring, couldn't bear to stay. I've traveled far since then, but I've never gone back. I've also never gone into dense woods alone again. Some fears never leave you. I don't know what that creature was. Locals started calling it the Pennsylvania Beast. Some said it was a wild man. Others claimed it was something called a Bigfoot, like the stories from out west. All I know is what I saw with my own eyes. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, moving silently through forests, watching from the shadows with those two knowing eyes. And sometimes, on cold October nights, when the wind howls through the trees, I swear I can still hear that laugh. Story 13. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but I need to put it somewhere. Maybe writing it out will help me process what happened to me. I've been carrying this for 13 years now, and I still can't explain it. It was early June of 2010. I'd been planning this solo camping trip for months, a 4-day trek into the remote parts of the Great Smoky Mountains, south of Cosby, Tennessee. I'm an experienced hiker and camper, been doing it since I was a kid with my dad. But this was different. This was my first extended solo trip into a really remote area. The first day was perfect. I'd hiked about 7 miles off the main trail, following an old hunting path I'd found on some forums online. The weather was ideal. Not too hot, clear skies, just a light breeze. I found this beautiful spot near a creek to set up camp. It was secluded, with a small clearing surrounded by thick forest. The creek was maybe 30 feet away, bubbling over rocks. Perfect white noise for sleeping. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and spent the afternoon just enjoying the solitude. I remember feeling so at peace. No cell service, no people, just me and the mountains. I caught a couple of small trout from the creek and cooked them for dinner. By the time I finished eating, the sun was starting to set. I built up my fire as darkness fell. The stars were incredible. You forget how many there are when you live in the city. I was just sitting there, sipping some whiskey from my flask, feeling completely content. I remember checking my watch. It was about 9:45 when everything changed. The first thing I noticed was a knocking sound from across the creek. 3 distinct knocks, like someone hitting a tree with a heavy stick. Knock, knock, knock. I sat up straighter, thinking maybe it was another camper. But I knew that was unlikely. I was miles from any official trail. I called out, "Hello, someone there?" My voice seemed to get swallowed up by the forest. Nothing. Just silence for about 30 seconds. Then 3 more knocks, slightly louder. My skin started to prickle. Something felt off. I told myself it was probably just a woodpecker, or maybe some wood expanding in a fire if there were other campers nearby. But at 9:45 at night, that didn't make sense. I was about to get up and investigate when it happened. This scream, I've never heard anything like it before or since. It started low, this deep guttural sound that you could feel in your chest. Then it rose in pitch and volume until it was this piercing howl that seemed to echo off every tree and rock around me. It wasn't human. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. Not a bear, not a mountain lion, nothing I could identify. And then it just stopped. Cut off mid-scream, like someone had flipped a switch. I was frozen. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear my pulse in my ears. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no night birds, nothing. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Nature doesn't just shut up like that unless there's a predator around. I was reaching for my knife when something massive crashed into my fire pit. A log, and not a small one. It was maybe 4 feet long and 8 inches thick. It scattered burning embers everywhere, some landing on my sleeping bag that I'd laid out near the fire. I jumped up, stomping out the embers before they could catch. That log hadn't fallen from a tree. It had been thrown, with force and accuracy. It landed right where I'd been sitting just seconds before. My hands shaking, I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the creek where the sounds had come from. And that's when I saw it, just for a second, at the edge of my flashlight beam. A figure, broad, thick, covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. It was stepping back into the brush, but I caught a glimpse of these enormous legs and a rounded head that sat directly on powerful shoulders, no neck that I could see. It moved with this fluid grace that was terrifying in something so large. I didn't wait around to see more. Pure survival instinct kicked in. I grabbed my backpack, shoved my sleeping bag and a few essential items inside, and started running down the mountain. I left my tent, my cooking gear, everything else behind. None of it mattered. I just needed to get away. The trail I'd followed up was narrow and overgrown in places. In the dark, with just my flashlight, it was treacherous. I slipped and fell several times, scraping my hands and knees, but fear kept me moving. After about 10 minutes of half running, half stumbling downhill, I realized something was following me. I could hear branches snapping, undergrowth being crushed. Whatever it was big, and it was keeping pace with me. But staying just far enough behind that, I couldn't see it in my flashlight beam when I looked back. I picked up my pace, and the sounds behind me increased. When I slowed down to catch my breath, the sounds slowed too. It was matching me, tracking me, but not closing the distance. This went on for over a mile. My lungs were burning, my legs shaking from exertion and fear. I remember thinking that if it wanted to catch me, it could have. It was faster than me, stronger than me, but it seemed to be escorting me, herding me away from its territory. There was one moment when I tripped over a root and fell hard. I lay there for a second, winded, and the footsteps behind me stopped too. I heard this deep breathing, this smell hit me, wild, musky, like wet fur, and something else I can't describe. I thought, this is it, it's going to get me now. But instead there was a loud crack as something hit a tree nearby. It was another warning. Get up, keep moving, get out. I scrambled to my feet and continued downhill, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly in front of me. The thing kept following, maintaining that same distance. Eventually, I reached a point where the trail widened and joined up with a more established hiking path. As soon as I hit that main trail, the sounds behind me stopped, just stopped. I turned and shined my light back into the woods, but there was nothing there. No movement, no sounds except the normal forest noises that had returned. I didn't stop moving until I reached my car at the trailhead hours later. I was exhausted, scraped up and still terrified. I locked myself in my car and stayed there until dawn, jumping at every sound outside. When daylight came, I debated going back for my gear. It was expensive stuff, and part of me thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing or exaggerated it in my fear. But I couldn't make myself go back up that mountain. I just couldn't. I drove to a diner in Cosby, my hands still shaking as I tried to eat breakfast. The waitress asked if I was okay, and I just mumbled something about a rough night camping. What could I say? That I'd been chased off a mountain by what looked like a Sasquatch. It's been 13 years, and I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was a bear standing up. Maybe the log was coincidence. Maybe the screaming was just some kind of bird or fox that I wasn't familiar with. But deep down, I know what I saw. I know what happened. That thing was intelligent. The thrown log wasn't random. It was deliberate, a warning shot that demonstrated both incredible strength and precision. It could have hit me directly if it wanted to. And the way it followed me, keeping that exact distance, that wasn't animal behavior. That was a thinking creature, one with intention and purpose. I've researched similar encounters since then. There are stories from all over the Appalachians about strange screams, knocking sounds, and glimpses of large, hairy figures. People laugh these stories off, call them hillbilly superstition. I used to laugh too. I don't laugh anymore. I still go camping, but never alone, and never in that part of the Smokies. I keep thinking about going back, maybe with a group, maybe with cameras. But then I remember the power behind that thrown log, the intelligence in the way it herded me out of its territory, and I decide against it. Whatever was in those woods that night, it let me go. It could have caught me easily, but it chose to escort me out instead. I think about that a lot. Why didn't it attack? Was it just territorial? Was it protecting something? I'll never know. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I hear those knocks again in my mind. Knock, 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 and then that scream, rising in pitch until it cuts off abruptly. And I'm right back there, heart racing, waiting for something massive to emerge from the darkness. I left a part of myself in those mountains that night. The part that felt safe in the wilderness, the part that believed I understood the natural world. Whatever I encountered was beyond my understanding, and that's the most terrifying thing of all. I still have nightmares where I'm running down that mountain trail, hearing those heavy footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. Only in the dreams, they don't stop at the main trail. In the dreams, they catch up. Story 14. I never believed in monsters. I'm still not sure what to believe, but I know what I saw that night in August of 1965. It's been almost 6 decades, but I can still feel the impact of those massive hands on my back, still hear the grunts and growls, still see those eyes in my nightmares. I was 23 back then. My name is David Thomas. I'd borrowed my dad's Chevy Bel Air for the night to take Mary, Susan, and Jean out for a drive. We weren't doing anything special, just cruising around Monroe County, Michigan, listening to the Beatles and enjoying the warm summer night. You know how it is when you're young. The world feels open, and danger seems like something that happens to other people. We'd driven out to this secluded spot by the woods that was popular with local kids. It wasn't super late, maybe around 10:30 or so, but it was dark enough that we had the headlights on. The girls were laughing about something that happened at work, and I was just happy to be out with friends on a Wednesday night instead of stuck at home. I remember exactly how it started. We were parked, engine still running because I wanted to keep the radio on. Mary was in the passenger seat next to me, with Susan and Jean in the back. We'd been there maybe 15 minutes when the headlights caught something. At first, it was just movement at the edge of the trees, maybe 40 feet in front of us. I remember thinking it might be a deer, but then it stepped fully into the light, and everything changed. This thing was massive. It just stood there, staring at us. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had at least a foot on me. It was covered in dark, matted hair. Not fur, exactly. More like long human hair all over its body. The face was flat, almost ape-like, but not quite. And the arms, God, the arms hung down almost to its knees. The girls froze. Nobody screamed. It was like our brains couldn't process what we were seeing. "Someone's playing a joke," I said, but my voice sounded strange even to me. "It's got to be one of the Johnson boys in a costume." The thing made this sound then, not quite a roar, more like a dog growling, but deeper, more guttural. It was the kind of sound you feel in your chest more than hear with your ears. Mary grabbed my arm. "David, don't." But I was young and stupid. I was showing off. And I honestly didn't believe what I was seeing was real. I thought it had to be someone messing with us. "I'm gonna go see who it is," I said, already reaching for the door handle. "David, please don't get out of the car," Susan said from the back seat. Her voice was shaking. I should have listened. I should have put the car in drive and gotten us all the hell out of there. But I didn't. I stepped out of the car, leaving the door open behind me. The headlights illuminated everything in this harsh, unnatural light. The thing was maybe 20 feet away now, just standing there. "All right," Very funny, I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. Take off the costume and stop scaring the girls. It tilted its head slightly, almost like it was curious. Then it made that sound again, that growl that seemed to vibrate the air between us. Up close, I could see there was no way this was a costume. The proportions were all wrong. The muscle definition under that hair was visible when it moved, and the smell, I hadn't noticed it in the car. But outside I caught this musky, wild odor, like wet dog, and something else I couldn't identify. It took a step toward me. That's when I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. "David, get back in the car!" Jean screamed from the back seat. I started backing up, eyes locked on this creature. It moved forward again, faster this time. In 3 quick strides, it was right in front of me. I remember looking up, actually looking up, at its face. The eyes reflected the headlights, giving them this reddish glow. I didn't even see it move its arm. 1 second I was standing there, the next, something hit me in the back with such force that I was thrown forward against the car. The pain was immediate and intense, like being hit with a baseball bat. I slammed into the side of the Chevy hard enough to dent the door panel. The girls were screaming now. Mary reached across from the passenger seat and was hitting the horn in panic, the sound cutting through the night air. I scrambled to my feet, pain shooting through my back, and dove into the driver's seat. The thing was right there, its massive form blocking the headlights, casting this huge shadow over us. I threw the car into drive and floored it. The tires spun in the dirt before catching, and we lurched forward. I thought we were clear, but then there was this tremendous thud on the roof of the car. "It's on top of us!" Susan shrieked. The roof of the Chevy dented inward. I could hear its weight shifting as I accelerated, the metal groaning above our heads. I swerved, trying to throw it off, but it held on. I could hear its hands, or paws, or whatever they were, gripping the edges of the roof and fenders. Mary was sobbing in the passenger seat. John was praying out loud in the back. I just kept driving, pushing that Bel Air faster than it had any right to go down that dirt road. We hit a particularly deep pothole, and the car bounced hard. There was another thud, and through the rearview mirror, I saw a dark shape tumble off the back of the car. It rolled once on the road behind us, and then got up with impossible speed, but we were already pulling away. I didn't slow down until we hit the main road, and even then I kept checking the mirrors, convinced I'd see it running after us. My back was throbbing where it had hit me, and I could feel blood soaking through my shirt where I'd scraped against the car door. "What the hell was that?" John kept asking. Nobody had an answer. We went straight to the sheriff's office. I remember Sheriff Tillman looking at us like we were crazy when we told him what happened. He sent a deputy out to check the area, but didn't seem to take it seriously. "Probably just a bear," he said, even though there hadn't been bears in that part of Michigan for decades. The next day, my dad was furious about the dents in his car. I had a massive bruise on my back, shaped roughly like a hand, but much larger than any human hand could be. The girls refused to go anywhere near the woods after that night. I thought it was over. I thought whatever that thing was, we'd seen the last of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, Friday the 13th, which seems almost too perfect in hindsight, I was at the gas station when I overheard some guys talking about an attack that happened the night before. At first, I wasn't really listening, but then I caught the words "hairy creature" and 7 feet tall, and my blood went cold. I interrupted their conversation, probably seeming like a lunatic, and asked them what they were talking about. They told me that Rose Owen and her teenage daughter Christine had been attacked in their car the previous night, in the same county, by something that matched exactly what we had seen. I went to the hospital that afternoon. I had to see for myself. Christine was there with a black eye and bandages on her head. When I introduced myself and tentatively asked what had happened, her mother Rose went pale. "You've seen it too," she said. It wasn't a question. Christine told me what happened through tears. They'd been driving home when this thing jumped in front of their car, just like it had done to us. But when Christine stalled the car trying to get away, the creature reached through her open window and grabbed her by the hair. It slammed her head against the door frame repeatedly until she passed out. Rose ran to a nearby house for help, and some workmen came running when they heard the screams. The creature disappeared into the woods. As Christine was talking, I noticed other people gathering around to listen. A nurse mentioned that another young woman had been attacked that same week. A man who worked at the lumber mill said he'd seen something matching our description near the creek the previous month. By the end of that summer, 15 people in Monroe County had reported seeing this thing. 15 separate witnesses who didn't know each other, who had nothing to gain by making up stories about a 7-foot-tall, hairy creature in the woods. The bruise on my back took weeks to heal. The nightmares lasted much longer. For months afterward, I couldn't sleep with the windows open, convinced I'd hear that growling sound again. I've thought about that night thousands of times over the years. I've read about Bigfoot sightings and compared them to what we saw. Some details match, others don't. I don't know what to call the thing we encountered. I don't know if it was the last of its kind, or if there are more out there in the woods of Michigan or elsewhere. What I do know is that it was real. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a costume. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist but does. I've never gone back to those woods. I moved away from Monroe County a year later and never returned. Sometimes I wonder if that thing is still out there, waiting in the trees for someone else to make the mistake I did, to step out of their car when they should have driven away. If you're ever driving through rural Michigan at night and see something tall and dark step out of the woods in front of you, don't do what I did. Don't try to be brave. Just drive away as fast as you can and pray it doesn't catch you. Story 15. I still get goosebumps thinking about that Thanksgiving camping trip back in 2004. We've always been an outdoorsy family, and spending Thanksgiving at our usual spot in Sam Houston National Forest near Cold Spring, Texas, had been our tradition for years. My husband Mike, our 12-year-old daughter Lily, our German Shepherd Rex, and I, it was our thing. Rain or shine, we'd be there with Mike's brother and his family, cooking turkey over the campfire, telling stories, and just enjoying being away from the city. That year the weather was pretty miserable. It had rained for days before Thanksgiving, and even though the downpour had stopped by the time we arrived, the ground was completely soaked. The temperature had dropped to the low 40s, which is pretty cold for Texas in November. Mike had called his brother on the drive up, and they were running late because their car had problems, so we decided to go ahead and set up camp. When we pulled into our usual clearing, I remember feeling a strange sense of unease. The forest seemed quieter than usual. Normally you'd hear birds, squirrels, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, but that day there was just this heavy silence broken only by the occasional drip of water from the trees. I brushed it off, figuring the wildlife was just hunkering down because of the weather. We worked quickly to set up our 3 tents in a small triangle around what would be our campfire. The ground was so waterlogged that every step made a squelching sound, and by the time we finished, my boots and the bottom of my jeans were caked in mud. Mike struggled to get a fire going with the damp wood, while I organized our supplies, and Lily played with Rex at the edge of our campsite. "Mom, Rex is acting weird," Lily called out at one point. I looked over and saw our normally playful dog just sitting there, staring into the dense trees. His ears were perked up, but he wasn't barking or growling, just watching intently. "He's probably just tired from the car ride," I said, though I felt that same unease creep back in. Rex was always alert to wildlife. He'd go crazy over a squirrel half a mile away, but now he was just still. As dusk approached, Mike got a call from his brother. They were having more car trouble and wouldn't arrive until much later. Mike decided to drive out to the main road to guide them in, since navigating the forest trails at night can be tricky. "I shouldn't be more than an hour," he promised, grabbing his jacket. "You guys will be okay, right?" "We'll be fine," I assured him, though I wasn't thrilled about being left alone as darkness fell. The fire was finally going, but it was small and struggling against the damp wood. "Just hurry back." After Mike left, Lily, Rex, and I huddled in our tent. The temperature was dropping fast, and our breath made little clouds in the air. I had the camping lantern on while Lily read her book, and Rex lay between us, unusually subdued. Normally when we camp, he's constantly alert, perking up at every noise outside. But that night he just lay there, occasionally lifting his head as if listening for something, but never making a sound. Around 8:30, Lily started yawning, so I decided we should try to get some sleep. Mike's sister-in-law, Janet, and her daughter were supposed to use the second tent, while Mike's brother and his son would take the third. Since they hadn't arrived yet, it was just us in our lonely little campsite. I turned off the lantern, and the darkness felt heavy and complete. The fire outside had probably died down to embers by now. I could hear Lily's breathing slow as she drifted off to sleep, but I stayed wide awake, listening to the silence of the forest. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps approaching our tent. At first, I thought it must be Mike returning, but something felt off. Mike would have called out, would have announced himself. These footsteps were cautious, almost stalking. I could hear the squish of the wet ground and the occasional crunch of gravel from our campsite perimeter. I reached for my phone to check the time. 9:18. Mike had only been gone about 45 minutes. It couldn't be him already, not if he was helping his brother with car troubles. The footsteps circled our tent once, slowly. I lay completely still, my heart hammering in my chest. Rex, who should have been going absolutely ballistic at a stranger approaching our tent, just lifted his head and stared at the tent wall. He didn't growl, didn't bark, nothing. It was so out of character that it terrified me more than the footsteps. Then came a sound that made my blood run cold. A low, rumbling grunt or growl right outside the thin fabric of our tent. It wasn't a bear. We don't have many bears in that part of Texas, and it didn't sound like any animal I recognized. It was too deep, too intentional. I reached over and put my hand on Lily's mouth before she could make a sound. Her eyes flew open, wide with fear. I put my finger to my lips, signaling her to stay quiet. Rex was now sitting up, his eyes fixed on the tent wall, but still making no sound. The footsteps continued around our tent one more time, then paused at the entrance. I was certain whatever it was would unzip our tent and reveal itself. But after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps began moving away, back toward the tree line. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore before I breathed again. Lily was trembling beside me, and I pulled her close. "Was that Dad?" she whispered. "No, honey, your dad would have said something." "Then what was it?" I didn't have an answer. "Probably just an animal," I lied, trying to sound calm. But I knew no animal would walk so deliberately, would circle our tent like that. And why hadn't Rex reacted? We sat in tense silence for what felt like hours. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to call for help, though I knew cell service was spotty at best out there. Finally, at around 9:40, I heard the familiar sound of Mike's truck returning. When he came to the tent, I nearly collapsed with relief. I unzipped the entrance and practically dragged him inside. "What's wrong?" he asked, seeing our faces. I told him about the footsteps, the grunt, Rex's strange behavior. He frowned, looking skeptical. "You sure it wasn't just the wind? Or maybe a raccoon or something?" "Mike, I know what footsteps sound like," I insisted, "and explain why Rex didn't bark. He goes crazy when a leaf blows past the tent, but someone or something circled our tent and he just sat there." Mike looked at Rex, who was now acting normal again, wagging his tail at Mike's return. "That is weird," he admitted. "Let me check around." He grabbed his flashlight and walked the perimeter of our campsite while I watched nervously from the tent entrance. He came back shaking his head. "I don't see any footprints other than ours, but the ground is a mess, from all the rain and mud, he said. Could have been a deer, maybe. I knew it wasn't a deer. Deer don't grunt like that, and deer definitely don't make wrecks freeze up. Mike's brother and his family finally arrived around 10:30. By then, I'd calmed down enough to help them set up, though I kept glancing into the darkness beyond our campfire's light. We stayed up for another hour or so, catching up and roasting marshmallows, but my heart wasn't in it. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Finally, around midnight, we all turned in. Mike fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the drive and setting up camp. I lay awake, listening. Rex was curled up at our feet, seemingly back to normal, but occasionally lifting his head as if hearing something in the distance. I must have drifted off eventually, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a sound that made my skin crawl, a long, drawn-out vocalization that was like nothing I'd ever heard before. It started as a deep, guttural sound, then rose in pitch to something like a whooping howl. It was loud enough that it seemed to vibrate the air inside our tent, and it went on for at least 10 seconds. Mike sat bolt upright beside me. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, we heard Janet calling from her tent. "Did you guys hear that?" Mike's brother shouted from the third tent. "Everyone okay?" We all emerged into the cold night air. It was around 3 in the morning according to my phone. The fire had died completely, leaving us in near total darkness except for our flashlights. "That wasn't a coyote or a wolf," Janet said, hugging herself against the cold. "I've never heard anything like it." "Maybe a mountain lion," Mike's brother suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. "Too loud, too sustained," Mike said, shining his flashlight toward the trees. "Mountain lions make short screams, not whatever that was." Lily tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, I heard something else earlier when you were asleep," she whispered. "It sounded like a machine, like a whirring or humming sound. I thought it was someone with a generator or something." I stared at her. There were no other campers nearby that we knew of, especially not in this weather. We stayed up for another hour, all huddled around the fire that Mike rebuilt. No one wanted to say it, but I could tell we were all thinking the same thing. Whatever had been circling my tent earlier might have made that sound. Rex stayed close to us, unusually clingy. Normally he'd be patrolling the perimeter of our campsite, alert for any intrusion, but that night he practically sat on my feet, looking up at me with anxious eyes. We made it through the rest of the night without incident, though I don't think any of us slept much. In the morning light, things felt less threatening, but there was still a tension in the air. While Mike and his brother made breakfast, Janet pulled me aside. "Lauren, that sound woke me from a dead sleep," she said quietly. "I've been camping my whole life and I've never heard anything like it. It wasn't natural." "I know," I admitted. "And earlier, something was outside our tent. It walked around it deliberately and made this grunt or growl. The weirdest part was Rex. He didn't react at all. He always barks at everything, but he just sat there staring." Janet's face paled. "You don't think it was like a Bigfoot or something?" she whispered, clearly embarrassed to even suggest it. "I would have laughed at the idea before that night, but now I wasn't sure what to think. I don't know what it was," I said honestly. "But it wasn't anything I recognize." We tried to salvage the rest of our Thanksgiving weekend, but the mood was off. We cut our trip short and headed home the next day, making excuses about the bad weather. That was 16 years ago, and I still think about it all the time. I've researched strange sounds in East Texas forests, looked up animal vocalizations, even reluctantly ventured into Bigfoot forums. I've heard recordings of supposed Bigfoot whoops and howls that sound eerily similar to what we heard that night. But what haunts me the most is Rex's behavior. That dog was the most vigilant animal I've ever known, yet whatever was outside our tent that night, he wouldn't make a sound. It's like he was, I don't know, afraid, or maybe something was preventing him from reacting. We never went back to that campsite again. Mike thought I was overreacting, but he couldn't explain the sound either, or why Rex acted so strangely. Some things just defy explanation, I guess. All I know is that something was out there in Sam Houston National Forest that Thanksgiving night. Something that moved like a person, but sounded like no animal I've ever heard. And whatever it was, even my fearless dog knew better than to challenge it. Story 16. I've been debating whether to share this for almost 20 years now. My wife thinks I should just let it go, but I can't. What happened that Sunday in June 2003 still keeps me up at night sometimes. I need to get this off my chest, even if most people will think I'm crazy or making it up. We were camping on our family property near Lake Rosso in Ontario. It's this beautiful piece of land my grandfather left me, about 40 acres, with a small clearing where we set up our tents, backing onto dense forest that runs down to a ravine with a creek at the bottom. My son Ethan was 11 at the time, and my daughter Emma was 8. We'd go up there maybe 4 or 5 times each summer just to disconnect and enjoy nature. That Sunday started like any other camping day. The kids were excited because I'd brought Ethan's dirt bike up on the truck. The clearing was perfect for him to ride around safely, where I could keep an eye on him. My wife Sarah was setting up lunch at the picnic table, and Emma was helping her. Normal family stuff, you know. Around 1 in the afternoon, I was sitting in my camp chair drinking a beer and watching Ethan do loops on his bike. We had these old straw bales at the edge of the property that had been sitting there since the previous fall. I'd meant to clear them out but never got around to it. They were at the edge of the clearing, maybe 70 yards from where I was sitting, right before the land drops off into the ravine. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow or maybe a bear. There was movement behind one of the bales, and I leaned forward in my chair, squinting. Then it stood up. I'm not exaggerating when I say my blood went cold. This thing, and I don't know what else to call it, rose up from behind the bale and just stood there for a moment. It was huge, maybe 7 feet tall, but hunched over slightly. The sun was behind me, so I had a clear view, and what I saw makes no sense to this day. It was covered in this reddish-brown hair, not like fur exactly, more like long human hair, but all over its body. The head was what really got me. It was massive, wide and oddly shaped, and it seemed to slope directly into its shoulders without any neck that I could see. The proportions were all wrong for a human or any animal I know. Then it started walking. It took maybe 4 or 5 steps along the edge of the ravine, moving with this weird gait. Its right arm was swinging as it walked, not like a person's arm, but like a powerful pendulum, much longer and more muscular than any human arm should be. It turned slightly before disappearing into the trees, and I caught a glimpse of its face. The facial area was lighter than the rest of it, almost hairless, with this light brown skin. The features, God, I don't even know how to describe them. They weren't animal-like, but they weren't human either. The best way I can put it is that it looked prehistoric, like one of those reconstructions of early humans you see in museums, but bigger and more wrong. The whole sighting lasted maybe 15 seconds before it walked into the dense spruce and birch trees and vanished. I realized I'd been holding my breath the entire time. "Ethan!" I shouted, probably louder than I intended. He cut the engine on his bike and looked over at me. "Come here right now." When he rode over, I asked if he'd seen anything by the straw bales. He hadn't, but he could tell from my face that something was wrong. I told him to stay with his mom and sister while I checked something out, trying to sound casual so I wouldn't freak everyone out. I grabbed my hunting knife, fat lot of good that would do, and walked over to where the creature had disappeared. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The ground near the ravine edge was soft from rain earlier that week, and what I found there made my stomach drop. Footprints, 4 distinct impressions in the mud, each one bigger than my size 13 boots. Each print had 5 toes clearly visible and a wide front pad like a human foot, but massive. They sank deep into the mud, maybe 5 or 6 inches down. I put my boot next to one for comparison, and it was significantly larger. The stride between them was huge too, probably 4 feet apart. Whatever made these prints was heavy and took enormous steps. I heard the dirt bike again and turned to see Ethan riding toward me, ignoring what I'd told him. When he reached me, I didn't even scold him, just pointed at the prints. His eyes went wide. "Dad, what made those?" he asked, his voice small. "I don't know, buddy," I said, though I was starting to have a terrible suspicion. I took some photos with my disposable camera, wish I'd had a digital one back then. The quality was terrible when I got them developed, and measured the prints using my hand span. Each one was roughly 16 inches long. We followed the prints to where they disappeared into the tree line, but I wasn't about to go crashing through the underbrush after whatever had made them. We headed back to camp, and I tried to act normal for Sarah and Emma's sake. I didn't tell Sarah right away, didn't want to scare her or the kids unnecessarily. Around 3 that afternoon, I decided to check out a bit more of the area. I told Sarah I was going to ride the dirt bike down to check the property line, but really, I wanted to see if I could find any more signs of whatever I'd seen. Ethan begged to come with me, but I made him stay at camp, which he wasn't happy about. I rode about half a mile down an old trail that runs parallel to the creek. The whole time, I felt like I was being watched. The forest seemed quieter than usual. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just the sound of the bike engine and my own breathing. I'd been out about 15 minutes when I heard it. A scream from across the creek that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't human, but it wasn't any animal I recognized either. High-pitched and wavering, like something between a woman screaming and an elk bugling, but much louder and more purposeful. It sounded like it came from maybe a quarter mile away on the other side of the ravine. I gunned the bike and headed back to camp, my heart racing. When I got there, Sarah was standing at the edge of the clearing, looking worried. "Did you hear that?" she asked immediately. I nodded, trying to stay calm. "Probably just an animal," I said, but I didn't believe it. "Emma heard it too," Sarah said. "She's scared." I spent the rest of the afternoon close to camp, keeping the family together. I told Sarah what I'd seen and showed her the photos I'd taken of the footprints. She was skeptical at first, suggesting it might have been a bear walking on its hind legs. But bears don't leave footprints like what I'd seen, and they don't walk upright for any distance. As evening came, we made dinner on the campfire and tried to have a normal night. The kids roasted marshmallows and we told stories, but I kept glancing at the tree line, especially as it got darker. I loaded my shotgun and kept it in the tent, something I'd never felt the need to do before on our property. Around 11 that night, after we'd all gone to our tents, Sarah and Emma in one, Ethan and me in the other, we heard a dog barking. It was our neighbor's black lab. They have a cabin about a mile away as the crow flies. The dog came tearing into our campsite, barking frantically, running back and forth at the edge of the woods. I got out of the tent with my flashlight, trying to calm the dog down, but it was panicked, barking into the darkness and then running back to me like it was trying to warn us about something. After about 20 minutes of this, the dog suddenly stopped, perked up its ears, and then took off into the woods, still barking. I called after it, but it was gone. The whole thing left me unsettled. Animals know things we don't. I didn't sleep much that night. Every crack of a twig or rustle in the underbrush had me sitting up, listening. Ethan slept soundly beside me, but I was wide awake until well after midnight. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I remember is jerking awake at 3:30 in the morning. The ground was literally vibrating. At first, I thought it might be a small earthquake, but then I realized it was footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving around our campsite. Whatever was walking out there was massive. Each step made the ground shake slightly. It circled our tents twice. I could track its movement by the sound and the vibrations. It paused near the fire pit for what felt like forever, and then approached my tent. I reached for the shotgun, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent wall. I could hear breathing, deep, heavy breaths that didn't sound human. The tent wall pushed in slightly, like something was pressing against it. Then it let out a shriek, just one, so loud and close that I felt it more than heard it. It was the same sound I'd heard across the creek that afternoon, but right there, just feet away from my son and me. I've never been so terrified in my life. And then, nothing. Complete silence. No footsteps walking away, no breathing, nothing. It was like whatever had been there simply vanished. I sat frozen for at least an hour, shotgun in hand, afraid to move or make a sound. Eventually, I saw the first hint of dawn through the tent fabric, and only then did I dare to unzip the tent and look outside. There was nothing there. No creature, no footprints, nothing. It had rained lightly overnight, washing away any tracks that might have been left. I checked on Sarah and Emma, who were surprisingly still asleep. They hadn't heard anything. We packed up and left early that morning. I told Sarah everything, and though she believed I'd experienced something, she wasn't convinced it was what I thought it was. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know what I felt outside our tent that night. We've been back to the property since then, many times, never experienced anything like that again. Sometimes I think maybe I imagined it all, but then I remember the footprints, the silence in the forest, the way the ground shook with each step, and that terrible shriek. I've researched similar encounters in the years since. All the details match what people describe when they talk about Sasquatch or Bigfoot. I never believed in that stuff before. Still don't know if I do now. All I know is what I experienced, and I can't explain it. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I can feel the ground shaking beneath me. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods, I feel like I'm being watched. I don't go out to the property alone anymore. Not since that Sunday in June, 20 years ago. Story 17. I've been wanting to get this off my chest for a while now. What happened to me back in September 2020 still keeps me up at night sometimes. I've told a few close friends, but most just give me that look. You know the one, like I've lost my mind or had too much to drink. So I figured maybe writing it all down might help me process it. And maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I'm an experienced canoeist. Been doing it for over 15 years, mostly solo trips. There's something peaceful about being alone on the water that I can't get anywhere else. Fish Eating Creek in Glades County has always been one of my favorite spots. It's remote, beautiful, and usually pretty quiet. I've paddled most of the waterways in South Florida, but this particular creek has a wild, untamed feel that keeps drawing me back. That day started like any other paddling trip. I remember it was unseasonably cool for September in Florida, maybe mid-70s with a light breeze. Perfect conditions. I arrived at the launch point around 7 in the morning, unloaded my green Coleman canoe, I've had it for years, packed my small cooler with water and some sandwiches, and set off upstream. The creek was particularly beautiful that morning. The water was so clear I could see the sandy bottom in most places, with schools of little fish darting away as my shadow passed over them. Cypress knees lined the banks, and the overhanging trees created these amazing tunnels of green that I paddled through. I spotted a few gators, but they were small ones that slipped into the water as I approached. Normal stuff for Florida waterways. About 2 hours in, I was deep into the backwoods. This part of the creek gets really narrow and winding, with vegetation so thick on both sides, it feels like you're in a maze. The only sounds were my paddle occasionally dipping into the water, birds calling from somewhere in the distance, and the constant buzz of insects. I wasn't making much noise. Years of canoeing have taught me how to paddle efficiently and quietly. I remember checking my watch around 9:30 when the creek suddenly widened at a bend. The right bank opened up to reveal this stretch of exposed mud, maybe 30 feet long, where the water had receded. Beyond the mudflat was dense brush, mostly saw palmettos and some scrubby pine. I decided to drift for a bit, just taking in the surroundings and having a sip of water. That's when I first heard it. At first, I thought it might be a deer or maybe a wild hog. We have plenty of those in Florida. But the footsteps sounded different, heavier, more deliberate. Whatever was moving through that brush was substantial. I could hear branches snapping and vegetation being pushed aside, but in a rhythmic way that suggested walking on two legs, not four. The sound was coming from behind the thick line of palmettos, maybe 40 or 50 feet from the water's edge, and it was moving parallel to the creek. I sat completely still in my canoe, barely breathing. Something in my gut told me this wasn't normal wildlife. I've encountered bears, panthers, all kinds of animals while out in nature, but this feeling was different. The hair on my arms stood up despite the warm morning. Then it emerged from behind the brush. I still struggled to find the right words to describe what I saw. It walked upright on two legs, but it wasn't human, not even close. This thing was massive, at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. Its body was covered in dark brown hair, so dark it looked almost black where the shadows hit it. The hair wasn't shaggy like you might imagine on a bear. It was more uniform, maybe 3 to 4 inches long, all over its body. What struck me most was its build. This creature had shoulders that must have been twice as wide as mine, with a thick, powerful chest that tapered to a slightly narrower waist. But its arms, God, its arms were impossibly long, with huge hands that hung down almost to its knees. Every movement it made showed tremendous power, like each muscle was coiled and ready to explode. Its head sat directly on those massive shoulders, with barely any neck visible. The face is what convinced me I wasn't looking at some guy in a suit. It had a flat, wide face, with a pronounced brow ridge that shadowed its eyes. The jaw was square and powerful, and though I couldn't make out detail from that distance, I could tell the eyes were small in proportion to the rest of its features. The creature moved with purpose, taking deliberate steps along the edge of the brush line. It didn't seem to be hunting or searching for anything, just walking, like it was patrolling its territory. I sat frozen in my canoe, afraid to move a muscle, afraid even to breathe too loudly. Then it stopped. It was right in the middle of that mud flat, completely exposed in the morning light. For a moment it just stood there, and I had this insane hope that maybe it wouldn't notice me. But then it slowly turned its head toward the creek, toward me. Our eyes met. I was about 30 feet away, floating silently in my canoe, and this thing, this Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it, locked eyes with me. I've never felt so small, so vulnerable in my entire life. It wasn't fear in the traditional sense. It was something deeper, more primal. Like my body recognized a predator that my mind couldn't fully comprehend. It made a sound then, a low grunt that seemed to vibrate through the still air. I didn't just hear it, I felt it in my chest. It wasn't particularly loud, but it carried power. What happened next still haunts me. Instead of running away, which is what any normal wild animal would do when spotting a human, it took one long step toward the water's edge, toward me. Not rushing, not aggressive, but deliberate, like it was curious or maybe testing my reaction. Instinct took over, and I started to paddle backward, keeping my eyes on the creature. My paddle accidentally knocked against the side of my canoe with a hollow thunk that seemed to echo across the water. The noise changed something in the creature's demeanor. Its head tilted slightly, and its posture shifted. Then it made another sound, not a grunt this time, but something deeper, more guttural. Not quite a scream or a howl, more like a short, powerful roar that seemed to reverberate through my entire body. I can't replicate it or even properly describe it, but it expressed one thing clearly: warning. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I quickly turned my canoe around and started paddling like my life depended on it, which for all I knew it might have. The whole time, I could feel its eyes burning into my back. I didn't look back until I'd gone around the bend and put some distance between us. When I finally did glance over my shoulder, the mud flat was empty. The creature was gone, melted back into the thick Florida brush without a trace. I paddled non-stop for nearly an hour, my arms burning with fatigue, sweat soaking through my shirt despite the cool morning. Every snapping twig or rustle in the brush along the banks made me paddle faster. I kept imagining that thing running through the woods parallel to the creek, keeping pace with me, waiting for another opportunity. When I finally reached the launch point, my hands were blistered and my shoulders felt like they were on fire. I loaded my canoe onto my truck in record time, fumbling with the straps, constantly scanning the tree line. The entire drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that massive figure emerge from the woods behind me. For weeks afterward, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs, but no bear moves like that, walks like that, has proportions like that. A person in a suit, out there, miles from any road, in the Florida heat, and no costume could capture the fluid, natural movement of the muscles under that hair, the authenticity of its gaze. What struck me most about the encounter wasn't just the creature's appearance, but its behavior. It didn't seem afraid of me at all. It was confident, territorial even. The way it looked at me wasn't with fear or even aggression, but with a kind of assertive recognition, like I was the intruder, not it. There was intelligence in those eyes, and that's what unnerves me the most when I think back on it. I haven't been back to that section of fish-eating creek since. I still canoe, but now I stick to more populated waterways, and I don't go alone anymore. Something fundamental changed in me that day. My understanding of what exists in the wild places of Florida and who really owns those isolated waterways. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has seen it. If there are others out there who've had similar encounters, but like me, keep quiet for fear of ridicule. All I know is that whatever I saw that day was real. It was powerful, it was intelligent, and it made it very clear that I was the visitor in its domain. I still can't explain what I saw. All I know is that I'll never forget those eyes, that sound, or the feeling of being truly small in the presence of something ancient and powerful that most people don't believe exists. Story 18. I still get goosebumps thinking about that night. It was July 4th, 2009, Independence Day. I remember the date clear as day because some things just burn themselves into your memory, you know? We were at my ex-wife's parents' place in Plainville, Indiana. They had this nice farmhouse with a big yard, perfect for cookouts and holiday gatherings. The whole day had been great. Weather couldn't have been better. Warm but not sweltering, with just enough breeze to keep the mosquitoes away. We had the whole crew there. My kids, my ex-wife Jenny, we were still married then, her brother Mike, his wife, and their 2 kids, plus some neighbors and friends from church. About 15 people total. We'd done the typical July 4th stuff, grilled burgers and hot dogs, played horseshoes. The kids ran around with sparklers when it started getting dark. The older folks had been sipping beers and telling stories on the patio all evening, just your normal, perfect holiday gathering. Around 9 o'clock, Jenny's dad Tom set up the fireworks. Nothing crazy, just the consumer-grade stuff you can buy at those temporary tents they set up in parking lots every summer. The kids loved it. Of course, we all did. There's something about sitting in lawn chairs with family, watching colorful explosions, lighting up the night sky that just feels like pure Americana, you know? Anyway, the fireworks finished up around 10:30. The little ones were getting tired, so Jenny took our kids inside to put them to bed in their grandparents' spare room. The rest of us were still outside, just relaxing on the patio, talking quietly and enjoying the night. Tom had this big patio with a fire pit, and we had a small fire going to keep the bugs away. It was around 11 when it happened. I'll never forget the look on Bill's face. He was one of the neighbors. He suddenly jumped up from his chair, almost knocking over his beer, and pointed across the road. "What the hell is that?" he said, voice all tense. We all turned to look. The farmhouse sits maybe 50 yards back from this county road, and across the road was a big bean field belonging to another farmer. The field was lit up pretty good from the full moon, plus the porch lights from the house. That's when I saw it. Something big was moving through the bean field, about 300 yards from the road. At first, I thought maybe it was a person, someone cutting across the field. But right away, I knew that couldn't be right. This thing was huge, tall, moving fast with these long strides. "Is that a person?" Mike's wife asked, squinting. "Too big," Tom said. He'd stood up too and was leaning forward, trying to get a better look. The thing kept walking, moving from west to east across the field. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. Broad shoulders, long arms that swung as it walked. It was leaning forward slightly, moving with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. We all just stood there watching, dead silent, as this, whatever it was, walked in a straight line through the field until it disappeared behind a small rise near the back edge. The whole sighting couldn't have lasted more than 30 seconds, but it felt like time had slowed down. As soon as it was out of sight, everyone started talking at once. "What the hell was that? Did you see how tall it was? Was that a person? No way that was a person." Mike looked at me, and I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. He raised an eyebrow. "Want to go check it out?" Now, I'm not usually the type to go chasing after strange things in the night. I'm pretty level-headed, but I'd had a few beers and curiosity got the better of me. "Let's take my truck," I said. I had my Ford F-150 parked in the driveway. It's a 4x4 with these aftermarket LED spotlights I'd mounted on a bar above the cab. Perfect for seeing in the dark. Tom wasn't too keen on the idea. "You boys be careful. Could be anything out there." Mike and I grabbed flashlights from the garage and headed to my truck. I remember my hands were shaking a little as I started the engine. Not from fear exactly, more from excitement and curiosity. We pulled out of the driveway and drove down the road to where we figured we could access the field. There was a dirt access road the farmer used for his equipment. We turned in and drove slowly along the edge of the field to where we'd last seen the figure disappear. The beans were about knee-high at that point in the summer, and in the headlights we could clearly see a path where something had walked through, trampling the plants. "Look at that," Mike said, pointing. Whatever it was, it left a trail. I parked the truck and we got out, flashlights in hand. The night was quiet except for the usual cricket sounds and the occasional distant firework from someone else's celebration. The trampled path through the beans was about 2 feet wide, way too wide for a deer or coyote. We followed the trail toward the back of the field. The moon gave enough light that we didn't need the flashlights constantly, but we kept them on anyway, scanning the ground. After about 200 yards, we came to a barbed wire fence that separated the bean field from a wooded area beyond. That's when we found the first real evidence that this wasn't just some drunk neighbor wandering through a field. The fence, 4 strands of barbed wire strung between metal posts, was pushed down, where something had crossed over, not cut or broken, but bent down, like something heavy had just pushed its way through. And caught on one of the barbs was a tuft of dark hair. Mike reached out and carefully removed the hair. It was coarse and thick, maybe 3 inches long. Not like human hair at all, more like, well, I don't know what. Not like any animal hair I recognized. "What the hell?" Mike whispered, holding it up. I was about to respond when we heard a sound from the woods, branches breaking. We both froze. I clicked off my flashlight instinctively and Mike did the same. We stood there in the moonlight, listening. More breaking branches, like something big was moving through the trees. Without a word, we both hurried back to the truck. My heart was pounding in my chest. Once we were inside, I turned on the ignition and flipped the switch for the roof spotlights. The powerful LEDs lit up the edge of the woods like daylight, and that's when we saw it again, just for a second, moving between two large oak trees about 50 yards into the forest. It was tall, wide, and covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. It moved quickly, deliberately, disappearing behind a thick trunk. "Did you see that?" Mike's voice was higher than normal. "Yeah," I managed to say. My mouth had gone dry. We sat there for a minute, spotlights trained on the woods, not saying anything. Then we heard it. A low, deep growl that seemed to vibrate the air, followed by a long, rising whoop sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. Whoop, whoop, whoop. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, not quite human, not quite animal. Something primal and ancient. Before we could even process what we'd heard, another sound came from the opposite side of the field, another whoop answering the first one. Whoop, whoop. Mike and I looked at each other, and I saw my own fear reflected in his eyes. We weren't dealing with just one of whatever these things were. There were at least two of them, and they were communicating. "We need to go," I said, putting the truck in reverse. As I started backing up, something hit the side of the truck with a loud thunk. I nearly jumped out of my skin. We looked out the window and saw a rock about the size of a baseball lying in the dirt. Then another one hit the hood, and another bounced off the roof with a metallic bang. "They're throwing rocks at us!" Mike yelled, ducking down in his seat. I hit the gas, spinning the tires as I backed onto the access road. More rocks, and what looked like tree branches rained down around us. One hit the windshield, leaving a spiderweb crack in the corner. As we sped away, the whooping calls continued, seeming to follow us. They were moving parallel to us in the woods, keeping pace with the truck, even as I pushed it to 30, then 40 miles per hour on the rough dirt road. We finally made it back to the main road, and I floored it, heading back to the farmhouse. Neither of us spoke for a minute, both breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. "What the hell were those things?" Mike finally asked, his voice shaky. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but they weren't human." When we got back to the house, everyone was waiting anxiously on the patio. We must have looked pretty rattled, because Tom immediately asked what was wrong. We told them everything: the trampled path, the hair on the fence, seeing the creature in the woods, the whooping calls, the rocks being thrown. As we talked, I could see the skepticism on some faces slowly turn to concern. The cracked windshield and dents in my truck's hood were pretty convincing evidence that something had happened. Jenny's mom, Diane, insisted we all go inside and lock the doors. No one argued. We spent the rest of the night in the living room, taking turns looking out the windows, jumping at every sound from outside. The kids, thankfully, slept through it all upstairs. Around 3 in the morning, we heard more of those whooping calls, distant but distinct, coming from the direction of the bean field. Everyone heard it that time. No one slept much that night. In the morning, Mike and I, along with Tom and a couple of the other men, went back out to the field. In the daylight, the trampled path was even more obvious. We found more of the dark hair on the fence, which Tom collected in a plastic bag. We also found several large rocks that had clearly been carried from the creek bed a quarter-mile away. They weren't native to the bean field, and most convincing of all, we found footprints in a muddy patch near the fence. They were huge, easily 16 inches long and incredibly wide. They weren't shaped quite like a human foot. The toes were different somehow, but they were definitely bipedal tracks. Whatever made them walked on 2 legs. We took photos with Tom's digital camera. It's been 14 years since that night, and I still don't have a rational explanation for what we saw. I've researched similar encounters online, read books about cryptids and unexplained creatures. Everything points to one conclusion, as crazy as it sounds. We encountered Bigfoot creatures that night. Not just one, but at least 2 of them. I know how that sounds. If someone had told me this story before it happened, I'd have thought they were making it up or had been drinking too much. But I know what I saw, what we all saw. I've never gone back to that part of Plainville at night. When we visit Jenny's parents for holidays now, I make sure we leave before dark. Call me paranoid, but some things you just don't mess with. I don't know if those creatures were passing through or if they live in those woods permanently. I don't want to find out. The weird thing is, I don't think they meant to hurt us. They could have if they wanted to. They were powerful enough to bend down that fence like it was nothing. I think we surprised them as much as they surprised us. They were defending their territory, warning us away. Message received, loud and clear. Some parts of this world still belong to them, not us. And on July 4th, 2009, I accidentally stumbled into their territory. It's a mistake I won't make again.